Alright, let me post this to Discord, and then we'll wait a few minutes for people to come in, and then we'll get started.
Gotcha. I think actually instead of doing modular talk, I did a random IDM song last night in like a 1-hour challenge.
Yeah?
And I think that might be a fun thing to break down.
Yeah, sure. I posted a description that you were going to talk about grid stuff, but let me change that really quick.
Okay.
Doing a track down break. Doing a track breakdown. Ray, still sound. Okay. So you are live right now. But we're just gonna wait for a couple people to kind of show up, and then we'll get started. Hello. Here we go. And then I'm gonna post this on my Discord of us being live.
Cool. If you want to share that link with me, I can post it to mine as well.
Yeah. Here we go. Okay. Sorry, I'm getting your screen full. Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome, welcome. We're gonna get started in just a second. And low, and then yeah, just a couple minutes. I'm just kind of finishing up and tying up loose ends on my end, and secretly making Hypatekt wait. All right.
Recording to logbook.
Yo, Avin, what's up, man? Somebody just followed. Dylan Malela, thanks for the follow. Appreciate it. Can you guys hear me okay? We'll see. There's like a 30-second chat delay, so... All right. Cool. Hypo, you ready?
Yeah, I'm good to go.
Hey, EXO. All right, let me turn the music off, and let's get started. Hey, everyone. How's it going? My name is Alckemy. I also go by Ian, and today I have an awesome person that goes by the name of Hypatekt. If you don't mind, say hello.
Hello, how's it going?
Thanks so much for joining us today. This is going to be relatively informal about what we're doing, but typically in the past with these producer podcasts, it's always just been something... Let me turn the music off. Oh, shit. I can hear myself.
Oh, my bad.
That's okay. Yeah, so typically this is I just kind of like to have people from the community come in and say hello and kind of show us some cool things within, their production world. And for you guys in the chat, be sure to say hello as well. And I think that you're the fourth person now to be on this show, so I'm glad to have you here.
I
Last
appreciate you
week,
having me on.
yeah, absolutely. Last week, I was actually on your podcast where we talked about quite a few things, and I think that it was more of like a philosophical approach, which I always enjoy. Um, and those things are always available as well. But yeah. So tell us about yourself if you don't mind.
All right. I am a 27-year-old producer out of Rochester, New York. Been producing for about 7 years, maybe with intensity for I'd say about 2 of those. Um, I make very indie-inspired dance music and very kind of glitchy bass music when I feel up to just wasting hours of my life in it.
Don't we all? That's like
Yes.
part of the best thing, right? Especially like during times of like quarantine and stuff. You it's pretty amazing like how much I've looked forward to just pass the time. At any point, or is there any chance that you could just turn up your mic though, just a little bit?
Yeah, I think that could probably be okay.
Yeah, that sounds so much better. Thank you. So yeah, like how did you get into to all this stuff? Like where did you get started? Because I think if I'm not mistaken, you're actually an architect, right? Which is super cool.
Yeah, so by trade, um, I'm an architect, and in grad school, we sort of developed this weird kind of character, almost a caricature, I would say, of an EDM artist with the name DJ Hypatekt, combining the words hype and architect. And through that, I picked up a pirated copy of Ableton and started making this very rock inspired um, house music. And I just kept at it when I was kind of burnt out on the architecture stuff.
So that kind of serves
And
as a, oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, and so it kind of started as a joke, as I think you were about to say. It eventually, once I kind of got out of school and had, time to have a life, I started producing a lot more seriously. And with quarantine, I've had the type of time we've had with quarantine and, launched the podcast. And I'm running a fairly large Discord server. And it's really kind of just grown from there.
Yeah, everyone that I met in your Discord server was also super friendly, and I think that like one of the cool things about being involved in this, I'm just gonna say like the electronic music scene community is just how genuine a lot of people are and how friendly people are to kind of just exchange information back and forth. I don't know if um if you always had an online presence or so, but I would say like even like 5 years ago, right? The amount of information that people were willing to give or just the openness that people have come into has kind of like exponentially changed over time dramatically.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I mean, I wasn't as involved, I guess, five
Yeah.
years ago, and there were only like a few channels you could get really good content from. Like I guess Sadowik was like a huge guy back in the day.
Who did you say that was?
Sadowik Productions.
I haven't heard of him before.
Oh, he's fantastic. He's a Canadian producer who's been making great YouTube content for like 10 years.
Oh, wow. I kind of feel guilty now. I should probably go check him out. um, so yeah, speaking of like your music in particular, like what kind of drew you to like the aesthetic of your music? What are some things, I know that you talked about like glitchiness and all that, but I guess like what are some things or some highlights and finer detail of like what you really like to do within your music?
Right. So I think for me, it's always been kind of a war with this like rock influence coming up. As kind of like an indie kid, I guess, in high school. Um, and like being, I guess, very like Vampire Weekend sort of influenced and that sort of peripheral, and then trying to see how that could translate to dance music, and then at times rejecting that, and then at times embracing it to little to no effect. And then, as I sort of got into the culture of what EDM culture is right now, learning more about people like Mr. Bill and AU5 and getting more into that sort of way of thinking about music, but then trying to fight to interject some of the meaning
Yeah.
from the other stuff into that kind of work. And that's really, I guess, at the core of my artistic struggle at the moment.
Yeah, I think that like it's an interesting thing too, right? Because like, you know, we had a talk last week over things, and we kind of brought this back up, but it does, you know, still it is still worth kind of like, you know, revisiting at times and stuff, because we're kind of in this like such a forward moment of music exploration or sound exploration that like while we're doing so many cool things, and I'm super guilty of it myself, of like trying new sound design methodologies or experimentations and all that, and like trying to find different ways to implement it, I do think that in a lot of ways it is easy to lose the meaning. Um, but that in itself can also kind of like extend to other forms as well, for like the mentality behind what people are trying to do, right? Like I think, for example, like people that just want to make bangers, like no shame to them, and you know I totally get that, but you know having that specific mentality kind of does, or can rather, lead to the loss of meaning of those things, because you're not really putting life into it. You're just trying to, you know, you're trying to do something that's been done so many times better than the people that have already done it before you.
Right. And I think that's kind of the weird intersection for me, is like if you're sort of not making it for other people, but in a way you're not injecting enough meaning to do it for yourself. Like you're kind of taking like a very artistic um, expression and turning it into just like a complex video game.
Yeah. I mean, complex video games are pretty fun, but do you feel like there's this stigma of pressure for people to make music that is accessible in order for them to feel like you can actually like make it in this industry?
Um, I mean, it's like you either make it accessible and do it at the right time and kind of know the right people, or you make something that's like so technically proficient and ahead of its time that it's hard to ignore, right? I feel like it's usually one of those two things.
Yeah, and I almost wonder how much control you actually have over that, other than hoping that somebody can recognize it for what it is, right? I mean, typically speaking, like historically, like there are so many artists that only became famous after they were already dead, right?
Right.
So, you know, I wonder if there is ever going to be a shift in society where we try to be a little bit more ahead of the curve and kind of try to see value for what it is before things kind of take off. But you know, that's not really something that I would know per se.
Yeah, I mean, I guess with my sort of Neil Straussian almost delve into the internet production culture, it feels like talent and popularity are kind of almost irrelevant to each other. You know what I
Mm,
mean?
yeah, yeah, and they
Like
should
they feel like
be,
very separate things in a
right.
way that maybe they shouldn't be, but kind of always have been.
I don't know. I think that like there's always a balance between those things, and I would like to, you know, that's why I like doing something like this, you know, where it doesn't matter if you're big or you're small or whatever. It's really like about the community. Um, I,
Right.
I feel like if we focus on that, then the experiences that we're not only going to share, but also um, the examples that we'll set towards building the community into a larger region, or to going forward, right, will set a good example for those kinds of things, and influence people to continue to grow with each other and all that.
Yeah, I mean, I think not to mention my Discord, because I had a very fun podcast last night with someone who was just plugging their socials every 30 seconds. So I don't really want to do that. Um, but yeah, no, I mean, as someone who's like sort of managing a community of producers more so than actually producing at this point, I think it's very important that we sort of set the right example for a community that's sort of very based on a meritocracy and very just based on being not only being supportive, but also just trying to push each other in a productive way rather than in a competitive way, I guess.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny that you bring that up too, though, to be honest, because I mean, at some point, you know, you do have to, you know, because you in one way or another, and you and I are content creators, like you do, like that is part of it, right? Is like, for one, quote unquote, cross promotion and all that stuff. But I also believe
Right.
that like it's not even, I don't even want to say that there's a way to do it. It's more so of like, what are your intentions behind trying to get people involved, right? For example, hey, do you want to buy my course? There's only 100 spots, and if you sign up right now, normally my course is $1,000, but I'll give it to you for 250 if you sign up for the next 10 minutes. Versus, hey, I've got a really awesome community and I would like you all to be part of it. There's a very clear, it's very polarizing what people are doing in that realm. But sometimes, like, I found myself into a lot of other communities where the people were just super awesome. And I think that, like, for me personally, rather than try to get people to come to my community, I tell my people to go to their community and interact with each other, because it's all, everyone's going to interact with each other anyways.
Right. And there's nothing worse than someone trying to force interactions.
Yeah, especially, like, you can lead a horse to water and that whole thing.
Right, right.
But yeah, it's I don't know. I think the community is in a great place right now, and I hope that it continues to grow in that direction. I've been in a lot of communities in my lifetime, from all the things that I do, from martial arts to the circus world to the tricking world to the music world and all that. And I've seen a lot of different faces of, like, a great community going in a lot of different places, both good and bad. And I have to say that for the most part, the music world has been the most consistent.
Right. Yeah, I think I would agree with that, coming from, I guess, the architectural community, which is kind of very vicious into itself and kind of plays a sort of, there's only so many sort of spots at the top kind of game. So everyone's very self competitive and it's very, I guess, destructive in
Yeah,
that way.
yeah, and I almost wonder, like, if the nature of that, because of, like, how, I don't know, like, I wonder, like, I guess I want to try to not necessarily put a label on it, but kind of pinpoint about what those reasonings might be. But I kind of feel like within architecture, or maybe I'll compare it more so to martial arts, right? Like, people are always trying to figure out, like, what the best martial art is, or who's the best fighter, or who's the strongest, to where there's no, like, you lose the you lose the expression, right? Like Jack was saying, like, you
Right.
have to roll back what music is meaningful to different people. And, like, yeah, I believe it too. Like, once it becomes a competition, it does lose value in that way. Um, and so if something is so competitive, then what happens is it becomes a destructive environment, versus, like, people trying to be well with each other or bring somebody up,
Right. And I think it sort of points to, there was this lecture I heard a number of years ago, and it was these two architects were doing this kind of dueling almost lecture where they were talking about their philosophies in a very competitive way. And then the guy who ran the college it was happening at was like just kind of reminding people, like, the real enemy, quote unquote, is out there, is like the general public. And I guess in, like martial arts and in music too, it's like really the person you should be focusing on as like a quote unquote enemy or to be competitive about is, your audience, is the crossover, right?
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
the real competition isn't between producers, it's the real competition is getting noticed by the general public.
Right. And I think, like, that's one of the biggest differences between this, is, like, a lot of times, for the most part, like, and that's kind of a unique, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I find that my biggest audience are my peers that are making music. So it's not
Right.
necessarily that they're my worst enemies by any means, but because we're all kind of, like, on the same path together, like, everyone that I'm sharing music with and stuff are people that make music, and people that are, I would say, more so, like, I think it's safe to say, like, on the same team in a lot of ways. Even if they don't like my music, I don't really care. Like, there's still, like, a mutual understanding. Um,
Absolutely.
but when you talk about, like, people that have, like, no idea what this kind of thing is, or, like, they have certain, like, predisposition biases, because the only thing that they judge music off of is whether they enjoy listening to it or not, then yeah, I would totally agree. Um,
Yeah.
and
Sorry, go on.
yeah, sorry, and I was just gonna say, like, in regards to that, it reminds me a lot of the circus world too. Like, the circus world is an interesting thing too, because, like, it is very competitive in nature, but at the same time, everybody has this mutual respect, because they're all risking their lives every single day. So it doesn't matter how good you are, if you're on stage and, you're doing something like trapeze swinging and there's no net below, like you don't really have time to think about, one-upping somebody because you have to do the same thing, 10 times a week and not, lose your life or break a leg or something. So while the music world isn't that dire in that way, like the I think that it's understood in between all of us that the amount of time that it took you to get where you are, to get where, all of our audiences, 'cause there's a bunch of people in here that are really good at music. Um, it that all takes time, and that's kind of like it's easier to see when everybody is expressing themselves, you know?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, it's, music shouldn't be like, did you ever see that movie Whiplash?
I have, yeah. That's the
Yeah.
best meme ever.
Oh, yeah. No, I finally watched it maybe a month ago.
Yeah.
And it's just perplexing because it's like the way I went to like grad school, that was my grad school experience.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So to
that's
come from that to, I guess, like the audio production culture, which is a lot more, I guess, forgiving and like trying to give people feedback. And it's like I'm used to a culture where feedback is like ripping someone's soul out and telling them why it's beating incorrectly.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, or like the opposite thing is like if you're just so woke like the bongo cat, then you can just play the meme of Whiplash, which was one of my favorite things. I swear I shared that video for a week to all my friends. It's just, I don't know, it was so relevant. I don't know if any of you all know what I'm talking about, but
No idea.
okay, just type in Whiplash Bongo Cat and you'll see what I mean. So yeah, we spent a lot of time on kind of discussing like the importance of uh, making sure that the community is on a good page with all of us and stuff. But right before we hopped on, um, there was quite a bit of technical difficulty, and I'm glad that we finally got that out. But we've kind of had like a small discussion about the Bitwig update. And could you tell us why you're kind of reluctant to update personally on the beta?
Right. I mean, just being on, I guess, your server and being on the Bitwig Discord server, all I'm seeing is people talking about how they pressed the wrong button in Polymer and or even an unrelated, not updated plugin, and now their Bitwig doesn't work at all. And it's like crashing. And I guess, which is crazy because, Bitwig is sandboxed in a way that it's supposed to never crash.
Yeah,
That's kind of
right.
a lot of the appeal.
It is kind of surprising, right? I think that like this is the worst, not the worst beta by any means, because the updates themselves are pretty awesome, but the stability of it is pretty loose, and that's a very loose term as well. But
Right.
personally, yeah, I lost a project unfortunately, and that is kind of heartbreaking. But you do learn to move on and all that. But I guess like no matter how stable you think a program is, if you're going to open something in beta, then you probably shouldn't do anything important. And there was that lesson learned. But still, even though you haven't updated and all that, do you find was there anything that was like interesting or appealing to you?
Well, I mean, the whole polymer and the wavetable synthesis inside of the polygrid is awesome, right? I mean, I'm currently trying to learn the polygrid just as well as I can because I really like the interface of it.
Yeah.
Um, and having wavetable capabilities within that seems amazing.
Do you feel like it's,
Um,
gonna kill Serum and Phase Plant? Like every time something, every time a wavetable synth comes out, that's what
oh
everybody
man.
says.
Well, a little bit about me. I did at the first few episodes of my podcast. You could insert or like age. There's like an arc because I started the podcast. I was using phase plant because I kind of refused to pay for more than one synth at a time.
Right.
I was using phase plant, and then it didn't out of the box didn't sound as good to me. Um,
Compared to
and
Polygrid?
compared to serum,
Okay.
and then I moved from that over to pigments, which I quite liked, but still found kind of limiting compared to serum. And now I'm in polygrid. It's going to be the serum killer. It's going to do it.
It's gonna be the one, right?
It's the one. Yeah,
Uh,
everyone's going to be routing in Bitwig into FL Studio like a reason rack to use Polygrid to finally kill Serum.
I mean, I don't know, man. How much do you know about Vital?
Oh my god. Oh, sorry. I was thinking of a different one when I was laughing.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Vital is I can't say too much about it, but
I've heard a little bit.
it's going to be something that I think is really cool, and that's not something that they're paying me for or whatever, and I have no like particular affiliation to them in that manner. But from what I have seen, I think that people are going to be pleasantly surprised with that stuff. But I was just curious to know if like you've heard anything about it or if you've seen anything.
Yeah, I mean, people on Mr. Bill's Discord server like to gossip, and we're talking a lot about it. I thought you were referring to that one that came out for $1 earlier this year, that was supposed to be incredible, that just completely flopped.
No, what's that?
It was some producer, someone in the chat maybe knows. Some producer put out a synth for $1, but it's only 32-bit.
Nice.
And then it was built using some like ancient technology from like I guess the early 2000s to like put together a synth.
Man, yeah, and that's I at some point I would love to do like
Genesis, that's correct. That's exactly what it is. Thank you.
Genesis. Okay, I'll have to check that out later.
Yep.
Oh, Genesis 2. Yeah. I think that it would be super fun to do a stream where like you just try to take the worst synths and VSTs and stuff and like the cheapest ones, and just see what you can do out of it or meme out of it. But that would definitely be a place to start. But it's 32-bit only. Well, that means that I can't even use it because Mac no longer supports any kind of 32-bit plugins.
Oh, that's wild.
Yeah, their operating system and stuff is just trying to be a little bit too uppity, you know. Oh, we don't offer 32-bit plugins anymore, or what the fuck ever. But you know. So yeah, speaking of the grid, how much do you feel like you like how familiar have you become with it, you know, like do you know all of the modules and do you know kind of like all like how to build specific functions, or like tell me about it?
Yeah, no, so I mean I was using VCV rack for a while before then, so the translation was very easy between those two. I think the grid is a bit more intuitive.
Yeah, sorry, like I think before, not to cut you off, but just on that comparison to VCV rack, there's a lot of people in here that that use Ableton, so I'm wondering if like you have any experience also with Max for Live.
I do not. I used Ableton not up to 9 until I decided to actually, pay for my software.
Good for you. Thank you.
Yep. Sure, the people at Bitwig are quite happy with that decision.
Right.
But on their marketing of being half the price of Ableton, but being a probably, in my opinion, better product, probably working well for them.
Careful, you might scare off all the viewers. Even though I agree. Ableton is great. Is there anything I guess it's like we've kind of brought it up. Is there anything that you want to say like that you like to compare between the two? Because like that's one of the biggest questions that I still get asked all the time.
Right. I think and correct me if I'm wrong about this because I only used Live 10 and Live 9 and not Live 10. But I think the automation capabilities are just so much more vast in Bitwig. Like you can really play like all of Bitwig like a synthesizer if you want to, in a way I don't think you can with Ableton and other DAWs.
Yeah, it's I think in some ways like I almost want to say that for me personally those are pretty good even, and the reason why is because in the update of Live 10 they started adding shapes that you can just import to automation. So like if you want to add a ramp or you want to add square waves or you want to add like easy sine waves, and then you also have these like boxed scaling functions that you can do in between that, where like you can where you can like resize or scale the entire shape in that way, and that's something that's kind of hard to beat. But at the same time, the modular environment that you have, like that you can do like as you know, because modulation and automation aren't the same thing, even though they perform the same function, you know, or whatever. In my opinion, is way more vast than what Ableton can do.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think Bitwig being able to run both 64 and 32-bit plugins simultaneously is
Right.
also great. At least on the Windows side is another perk.
Have you whenever you import clips to Bitwig, do you auto warp that to match your BPM?
I keep everything raw.
You keep everything raw?
Keep everything raw usually.
Yeah.
I know there's a number of more warp modes, and I've been experimenting with them more lately, but I really don't use a ton of like loops in that kind of way where that would be a problem for me.
Do you like whenever you do like sound design and stuff, do you mostly like not ever develop any of those kinds of loops or one shots or whatever?
In what way?
I guess like sometimes for me personally, like I tend to do some percussive loops every once in a while. And actually, for me personally, I leave everything to slice mode, and the time stretching that it does is actually like pretty impressive compared to how you would have to like do like a tempo sync or something in Ableton or know the host BPM of the sample that you're importing, right?
Oh, right. Okay. So if you're doing like a multi-sample slice.
Not necessarily. You can do that, and that's something that I do pretty often as well, of like bouncing out like a bunch of long like sound design jam clips or whatever. But even if it's just like like I said, like a drum loop, like a percussive loop or something of that nature, like I've found a lot of success with it just kind of like matching up and working really well. And it's not perfect, but man, that was one thing that I was kind of like, that's a sleeper feature that I think people should use more, is what I'm getting at.
Right. I mean, I definitely use it a lot when I'm like just manipulating like audio, like the clarity you can get with like when you're like taking like a guitar take or like a vocal take
Hmm.
and like moving it to be in time,
Yeah.
I think is really impressive.
Yeah, the way that it handles stretching is a little odd, but I think that like the audio editing capabilities, I would say, and especially the way that you can do like pseudo comping of like taking multiple takes and having that nice little window set up and having all those functionalities and things are, I don't know, man. I just, I love Bitwig for a lot of specific reasons, but I'm curious to see if you shared some of those same, I guess, sentiments. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
sounds like it. I think I have very mixed opinions on Bitwig's piano roll.
yeah, yeah. That's something for sure.
You know exactly why I don't like it too, don't you?
Maybe, I'm not sure. I have my own reasons.
Um, what are yours?
It's sometimes kind of confusing, of of like figuring out where you are. So like if you're in track mode, right, on Bitwig, it's not the same as when you're in the clip mode if you're looking at like the actual clip inspector itself. And
Right.
sometimes whenever I click on a specific place, like I'll have every single clip that's within that entire track like viewable, and I can't navigate where I am. And then also because of velocity, like on one end I do like that the velocity color changes as like the colors of the rainbow with how either big or as the velocity gets bigger or smaller, but that usually messes me up a lot because the track is a different color, so like sometimes get lost and think that I'm editing something different.
Right. So you're saying like when you have like multiple tracks overlaid on top of each other.
No, just by themselves. Like by default,
Oh,
like everything that I plug in is yellow by default velocity. And so like even if I have a single track that's supposed to like that has a gray clip, the notes that I have on there that click on are usually yellow. And then sometimes like whenever you play VSTs and stuff, like it'll have this like this note latch or something to where it's not supposed to. It'll just keep playing even though you stop playing keys, and you have to find the key that you last played in order to make it stop.
oh yeah. No, I've definitely noticed that. I don't know. I didn't have a name for it, but that makes sense because that is something I've dealt with from time to time. That's kind of an odd thing.
Okay, I thought I was the only one. There's still a couple things in Bitwig that I'm like, wait, this isn't supposed to, is it just me or but yeah,
Right.
what's your reasoning?
I think the copy and pasting and the way it works in
Oh,
with like
right.
within clips is terrible. It's
Yeah.
so bad.
Like if there's not enough time or something, like it won't even let you copy it over as opposed to just extending the
Right.
clip.
Well, it's not even, yeah, or if the things at the end of your clip are like empty space, it won't kind of know that. So it's like if you're just trying to clip 1/8 note, over and over again,
Yeah.
but you have like you accidentally clicked the eighth note after it too.
And it's kind of
Just give
odd.
you,
Oh, I'm so sorry.
oh, keep going.
It's kind of odd that if you hold shift and you just try to drag everything like all the notes on a, or you try to highlight all the notes on a single like pitch just for the sake of distinguishing those, it still highlights everything. So you have to like go and click on the whole thing. It's, yeah, that confuses me a lot.
I'm right. You have to like control click everything, or else it's like really hard to just like if you're like just trying to take the top line
Yeah, it grabs
from
everything.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Right on. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, everything has its ups and downs, and I'm never that kind of person that's like, well, this style is the best or this is whatever. But I can definitely agree
Right.
that for our personal like workflows and stuff, there's definitely a clear reason why I made that choice to switch from Ableton. And I mean, obviously you did too. Granted, even though you didn't start using Ableton 10, Ableton 10 is a lot more similar to Bitwig, or they're more similar to each other than I would say Ableton 9 is. But yeah, so I'm curious, like what kind of stuff did you want to show us today?
So this was funny because this came about, I guess, after our conversation. We were originally going to talk about something else, but I was challenged to an IDM off by someone half my age, I guess, last night. So we just took an hour and each made an IDM song, basically.
Cool. I actually haven't heard it yet, so that'll be exciting for me too.
Yeah. So forgive me for this because it was made in an hour.
Totally fine.
But
Whenever you switch over, I don't know if you're on multiple monitors or not, but is there any way that like do you have monitor split, or are you just in full screen?
I'm just in full screen.
Okay, so if a question comes up, I'll be reading chat, and if at any point somebody, and again, I didn't mean to cut you off, I'm sorry, but if at any point somebody wants to ask something about what you're doing specifically, then I'll kind of be that mediator and try to go along with that if you're okay with questions along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't I play the full track because it's only 1:45.
Yeah, sure.
And then I'll start breaking down how the elements came together.
Cool.
Okay.
We had sound and then we lost it.
Is it not running?
Oh, now it is. Oh, now it's not. There we go.
Did that come through okay?
Yeah, for the most part. Tony says that he thinks that he hears phase mono, but I wouldn't be surprised if it has something to do with just the setup that we're working with. You guys don't know this, but we had to sit on the Zoom call for like 20 minutes just to even get sound to come out of the computer. So
Yeah.
try to if you notice anything about mixing or something, try to give him a little bit of benefit of the doubt. But aside from that, this is a work in progress too, so this isn't the time to bring that stuff up. It's more so just about learning about the creative process and all that stuff.
Right. I mean, there also is like a pretty aggressive phaser on the sub. I don't know why I did that, but it seems to be causing problems for people.
Well, I don't know, like, to be honest, I think that, yeah, so that's a great topic to actually talk about, because typically within, like most electronic music, right? Like doing any kind of stereo information on a sub or on your low end is like a big no-no. And it makes
Yep.
sense for like playback on like a PA system and all that, but I don't think that there's anything wrong with trying to like once we understand that, of like going beyond that and trying to push things a lot like further, of having those kinds of things, right? And in some cases that can actually work. Like, I haven't necessarily used a phaser on my own, but detuning while leaving the low end is still going to give you somewhat phasing, right?
Right.
Albeit
Absolutely.
rhythmically. But at the same time, like, I'm even trying to experiment with seeing how much low end or how much stereo I can get out of more and more low ends. I've only gone maybe like 110, but like, sorry, I'm trying to connect my thoughts, but depending on your listening environment, even though you hear something in mono, except for headphones, it's never in mono because of your listening environment. And I think that's something that a lot of people should look to explore when trying to do something different, right? Like, even if you are sitting in front of two speakers where quote unquote the information is coming out the same, depending on your listening environment, like, it's still not going to come out in that way. And I think that there's a lot of like exploration opportunity to look in those directions.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I think Matt Zoe has been talking a fair bit about this recently. And I mean, I think also with just the fact that we're in, quarantine and the context that we're writing in, it kind of makes a lot of sense to make music that just sounds really good on headphones,
Right. Yeah.
you
It,
know? So, and if you think about it from that perspective and that's your audience, then you have so many more possibilities in terms of what you're doing with your low end rather than just, doing mid side on your master and to get rid of it and calling it a day.
yeah, I think so too. Your left ear still picks up sound from the right speaker. Yeah, right, exactly. Something that I was talking about, I don't know if you know who Hudson Lee is or not, but he was talking to me about, I think it's called RHTF, and that's just kind of like your listening um your listening perception and like EQs that are surrounding you, like, by nature. So like, depending on where the sound is coming from in a 3D space relative to your ears, like, there's different frequencies that come through, and there's also like specific cuts and like EQ shapes that you have. And it's not something that I know a whole lot about if I haven't like looked as far into it, but it does make sense just because of how we perceive sound. And I think that, like, rather than kind of just doing something that's typical, sorry, this is really cool, and I was just like geeking out over the topic, but having the ability to kind of expand on those things is, I don't know, I just see a lot of potential in that world.
Yeah, I know I do as well. And I think especially as we kind of move forward with the sort of timbral direction, I guess IDM is or EDM is headed in, I think that you would go to those sort of lengths kind of makes sense. And it's just ways to add layers of complexity to what you're doing, because that's kind of, I guess, the cultural appetite right now.
Right. And I think that that's one of the biggest reasons why, personally for me, like, IDM has been so much fun to make, is because I don't have to sound like anybody else, and for that matter, I don't even have to sound like anybody. I can just like throw crazy sounds together and just see if they fit in some, at least one of the musical rules of like either rhythm or harmony or whatever else you want to, categorize that in. But yeah, sorry for the off-topic thing. Tell us about your track.
No, I mean, we can go as off topic as we want. Like I said, this was less than an hour and a half of work, you know.
Yeah.
And I probably half of it was on the bass design, which is kind of buried in the what's it called? Buried in the, I guess, quote unquote drop, maybe. But if we solo that,
Man, have you played Armored Core?
I have not. I'm not a big video game guy. Sorry.
No, no worries. Your music, like, I think I told you this before, but like your music reminds me of just so many, like, it's really surprising that you haven't had any of those direct influences, but like this totally reminds me of something that you would hear like when you're customizing your robot, and like at a shop and
Cool.
like purchasing like new upgrades for like for your arm cannon or something. But yeah, sorry, that was just like something that this tune reminded me of. But yeah, how was this bass made?
Yeah. So this was, a kind of classic sort of serum patch. I don't have the patch because I accidentally deleted it. Because as you can see, I have some amount of OTT on the tracks.
I don't think you have enough.
I did the octagon. I think they're calling it these days. Kind of just as a joke to myself, which kind of more or less the track was as well. But this was kind of, I guess, a very classic way of making, of doing bass sound design, where I came up with an initial shape. I took the LFO, I put it at 16th notes for the one here, this first one. It's oscillating at 16ths, and then the one below it is oscillating at quarter notes or eighth notes, and then going down and then sort of mashing between them, so they're all in that same sort of sound family.
Yeah, I like that word that you just used, sound family. There's something that I've been discussing with people from time to time about like relationship of people getting confused with like basses and XYZ and mid basses and this and that. But I think that like using that term in particular is one of the most important things that people might want to take away from what you're talking about, but also like with sound design in general. The relationship of where instruments belong, both in the frequency spectrum, but also like as far as like mixing placement and all that other stuff goes, right? Like, do you ever get the question from people that might ask you of like, hey, do you have sub in your bass, or do you like separate it separately and all that stuff? I don't know if you do or not.
I don't really get asked it a lot because when I discuss music, it's a lot more loose and a lot less technical, and not the and it doesn't come up a ton. But personally, I always separate my sub and cut out my basses. I think you can see here, yeah, my basses are cut right at like 60.
Yeah.
Which, they probably should be cut higher than that, and then my sub is, I guess, cut at 1K, and was essentially just a sine wave with some distortion on it.
Which is something that's interesting too, right? Of seeing the way that people do those kinds of things. But I think kind of like pertaining back to that that term, the way that you decide the sound family in that way, right? So like in this particular case, like your mid basses are something different than what your sub is, and you having that relationship or having that know-how is something that will help you kind of separate your individual mix process.
Right. So I think when I think about that, you try to kind of want to have different things going on in each frequency range.
Right. Yeah.
So like at your low end, you want something that's as sine wave as possible, but with enough added harmonics that people will actually hear it if they're listening to it in unideal situations. In your mid range, you want like some level of complexity, and then in your highs, you want a contrasting thing with also complexity, but probably more complexity because there's more space to fill in the EQ range.
Yeah. And again, you hit a really important topic too of like talking about contrast, right? I think that like for me personally, even though I keep a lot of low ends in a lot of the experimental sounds that I make and stuff, there's still some kind of contrast that we want to try to identify within having the relationships of like our sound and when they play, I guess. of that sort, and this is a great way to kind of like, to kind of exemplify that in itself. I think, like, do you ever like make experimental sounds like beyond like something that's supposed to be a bass or something that's supposed to be something, and like you think about like, or have you ever ran into the issue of like not knowing how to contextualize?
Oh, absolutely. I'll make you make sort of sounds for the fun of it, and then it's just like you sort of end up having to use it as your bass, your mids, and your highs because you really don't know what else could possibly fit within that range,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely. And I think that like just by kind of bringing this point up, like with a lot of people that are watching this, maybe not necessarily in the chat right now, but people that will watch this later and stuff, like whenever they're looking at like, or wondering or trying to solve the problem of how do I use this sound, contextualizing it into that quote unquote, like you said, sound family, I think is an excellent strategy to get people to kind of, incorporate some of those things that they're doing.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, sorry, I just thought that was a really cool point that you brought up, and I kind of just wanted to touch on that. Yeah, please
Yeah. Well, I
continue.
mean, I guess I heard it the other day, and it sort of made heard it being thought of in that way, and it kind of took me back to how you kind of how I think about architecture. And so there was kind of a direct neural link between the two.
Yeah,
Um,
like I guess how would that relate to you, like in means of architecture?
right. So in the architecture software, you often have grouping. So say you have a wall, right? You have a brick wall, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you could think of your brick wall as your low to mid range, and a brick wall is a family of wall, right? So say like a square wave based sound is your analog to your brick wall, right?
Yeah,
So within that, as you sort of design a building, you run into different scenarios with the way that your walls interact with your roofs and with your floor plates, and with, I guess, interior walls. And you have to change the assembly of that brick wall into types of that family.
makes sense.
And so in the same way, when you're, designing a base, you're kind of doing the same thing, right?
Yeah,
You're taking um, one sort of family of sound and then modifying it to fit the context of what's happening in your drums and your high end and what you think, sounds cool, really.
yeah, makes sense. I think that like one of the most fascinating things, and like part of the reason why I like asking questions about like architecture and stuff, is because I feel like there's a very clear and concise structure to it, especially since a lot of it is, there's a lot of math and like physics involved with, making sure that, something can stand up and not, put too much stress on one particular aspect of the building that's going to make it crumple or something. But just like architecture, um, with a lot of other things, especially in the artistic world, believe it or not, like there is a specific structure of things of how they all work. And once we kind of have an understanding of that structure, then we can kind of abuse it to break it in different ways that won't completely, make the whole thing fall down, as so to speak.
Right. I mean, especially with, the advent of digital technology, it's just as easy to make, a crazy unbuildable building as it is to make, some crazy sound design that you can't find a way to contextualize
Yeah.
into a song.
Yeah, that's a cool analogy, and that kind of resonates with me with a lot of the other stuff that I do as well. Outside of music, and I think that's kind of another point to kind of like discuss about like finding a transparency between all of the different kinds of media or problem solving aspects of our lives, right? That's a little bit more on like philosophical side of things, but to me, I feel like so many skills that we practice in this world kind of allude to umbrella skills, if that makes sense. It's just you kind of have to change the way that you go about it. But in the same way that we try to solve problems of making bass or of making a track come together, a lot of those same problem solving formulas are applicable to the other things that we do in our lives. For example, figuring out what we want to eat, or figuring out how to pay the bills or whatever. It's just the context that changes, but the expression is the same.
Right. It's learning how to learn, I think, is the or thinking about how to think is really what it comes down to.
Yeah, how to think as opposed to what to think.
Right. Thinking about how to think.
Yeah, that's
Right. Because you can think about how you assemble a song, right, in the same way that you think about how you make a painting. Like those things, the way you structure those things and the way you think about them until you get to a very technical level can be exactly the same.
right. Yeah, for example, like your kick is blue, you know, or your kick is a Bob Ross tree or something, and you're just gonna paint them along your timeline, and sometimes you get some happy little accidents, and then you end up with a syncopated rhythm.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And
Sorry.
no, it's also a great trick because if you I think a lot of people benefit from not knowing what they're doing, especially in the creative process. And a great thing to do is to like pick up a completely new artistic medium and then sort of try to think about music in the same way that you were thinking about that sort of foreign artistic medium, and just give yourself like that clean slate again, so you don't have the sort of built up patterns of the way you do things.
Yeah, that's interesting too, and like I allude a lot of things in this kind of like in the world of expression to language, but it's kind of interesting to I guess delve into something like that of a brand new form of medium to where you wouldn't necessarily know that particular dialect, I think would be the right way to describe that, but you still try to find the universal language, or the or on a more simple terms, the parallels between all that. So that's a really interesting thing to think about as well. Something I haven't thought of before. Because normally I would feel like you would try to bring experience of what you have from before to learn the new thing, rather than
Right.
the other way around.
Yeah, I know what I think. The term architects like to use a lot is the term critical naivete, um, which is the idea that you have a technical background to kind of get to where you want to go, right?
Yeah.
So on a technical level, you're a very talented producer, but if I throw you into a new genre, you would have to take on this approach of like really acting like you don't know what you're doing, so that you don't just do what you did in the genres you were proficient at.
Right. Like
And to
not doing
think
what I'm
about
used
this,
to.
right,
Yeah, makes sense.
to think about this new genre, I guess.
Yeah.
um, but then at the same time having the technical skills to whatever you do think of, you do have enough to take it all the way to the end.
Right. It's almost kind of like putting it in your pocket, right? It's like it's saying that
Right.
like, you know how to do something already, but you need to kind of dismiss that for a bit in order to let yourself be in the moment to learn, I guess, the technicalities of what makes this different. But I think that if you just kind of jump into something and try to throw yourself into it, then like your expectations are probably going to yield poor results. It's like if you're a black belt in jujitsu and then you step into, you step into a Muay Thai place thinking that you're just going to walk in with a black belt, you're going to get your ass handed to you. Hopefully
Right.
the mistakes that we all make in our creative endeavors don't have that big of a consequence, but I think it is, as extreme as that is, it is kind of the same understanding of those things.
Yeah. And I think it's like with architecture, it's like any architect can look at any site and see a box, right?
Right.
But it takes that to look at a site and not see a box, but see that site and see that set of complex parameters for what it is.
Right.
And if you can apply that to, I guess, to like raw ideas that you have, like of like how a track could be, I think it could lead to a lot more fertile experimentation.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, I don't know. Experimentation within like music stuff has really just been, I think, one of the most fun things about this. And like once we get to a point where we don't feel like we like have to do things right, and we're kind of conscious of making mistakes but for the right reason, um
Right.
I feel like that is kind of where you really start freeing yourself up with learning the most, at least as far as like a technical standpoint, right? Because composition takes a little bit more a little bit more refinement. And I think that because you can only like make so many, like it takes a lot longer to make a full track than it does to make a sound or to make a beat idea or something, right? That process is a little bit slower, but as far as just enjoying yourself in the DAW and like kind of experimenting with relationships of how all these things work, which is kind of why I like that you did this today, because even though it's not a finished track or whatever, it doesn't need to be, and we have been able to kind of talk about a lot of the creative processes that go into this, as opposed to like how did you, which I still like want to know and stuff, but like as opposed to this very specific of like how you made your snare and how you made sure that this is supposed to be correct, because that stuff is like, it's kind of irrelevant these days.
Absolutely, yeah, it absolutely is. There's too much music out there, I think.
It's a hard thing to say, though. Yeah.
I mean, yes, but hear me out. There's too much music out there in the sense that most things that have been. I'm having a very hard time articulating this thought.
Would it be like
there's already a version of your song that doesn't feel specific to you? Like if you're just copying something or doing something by the rules, then that song is probably already out there.
Yeah, right. And somebody's most likely done it better.
Exactly.
Would it be fair to say that there's too much of the same music out there?
I mean, yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, I think that's fair to say of literally any artistic medium, but music, especially with, the proliferation of how easy it is to make these days.
Right. And
professional recording.
Yeah. And as like time goes on, right, it only continues to get easier. Like, again, like kind of talking back or alluding back to the conversation about, that I was having with somebody, we were talking about like halftime and how, unfortunately, I think that it was you and I that talked about, and also Young that was talking about Big Room, right? And like how it didn't go anywhere. And like I'm starting to become a little bit worried that like a lot of people are starting to get the same sentiment of like halftime music, because like everyone is just trying to do over distorted drums with, a fuzz noise bass. And while part of me will always like that just because of, liking that particular aesthetic, I do feel like at the end of the day, it will be hurtful in the long run of things for that particular genre, because, it is the same.
Right. I mean, I think most people kind of think genres are dead. I don't know anyone who produces strictly one genre these days. But also a quick correction, just because he will be mad at me if I don't say it. It was actually my co-host Vadis we were talking about that with.
Oh, so sorry. I for some reason I thought that I thought that Young was also in the podcast. But sorry, Vadis.
Young is a national treasure of the Kingdom of France, no doubt, but no.
sorry, Vadis. To be fair, I did have quite a few personal conversations with him. I am just kind of, as you were from before the podcast, a little bit all over the place. But yeah, feel free to grill me later about that.
No grilling here.
But yeah. So
just compliments for you, really.
Right? We could just pretend that they're the same person. No, we can't do that. But yeah. So I guess like
Yunk is way more charming. But sorry, go on.
Okay, so now I'll just let you have the floor, and then like let you say more of that, so that way he'll forget that I forgot his name or forgot to mention his name correctly. I didn't forget him. But yeah, so like what exactly was the challenge behind this track in the first place?
So the challenge was, I guess we just wanted to make an IDM song. He was like, I'm gonna make an IDM song, someone make an IDM song with me. And I was like, IDM hour, let's do this. I'm like, I haven't produced in this kind of modality for a while. I've been kind of making more 80s influenced like guitar music for the past few months. And while I occasionally sort of go down this way of doing things, I hadn't done it in a few months. So it was nice to reawaken that sort of skill set and that modality.
Sure. Was there like a specific reference that you were kind of pulling from? Just because, and the only reason why I say that is I'm kind of curious to see like if you had any references or something, just because for me particularly, like obviously the kind of IDM that you presented, and this isn't a battle about who's correct or not, it's just different or whatever, but like the kind of IDM that I present versus like something like this is dramatically different, right?
Right. I guess half remembered early Aphex Twin would be one of the touchstones.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I yeah, and that's kind of something too, you know, of all those things. And I've kind of found that, like, we were talking about, well, while I was on your podcast, about like what EDM means to all of us, right?
Right.
And then after, or I guess like here in the moment now, like even now, like those kinds of things are becoming a lot more loose terminology as well. And it doesn't matter in particular, while I feel, but it is interesting to see like what people perceive that particular acronym as. And I think that it's kind of cool that even though what you've kind of made is different than what I do, it is interesting to see that the sources that you're using are actually relatively similar to the same ones that I do too. So that's kind of neat.
I mean, I think we'd probably both agree this fits more into like a weird form of drum and bass than IDM, but no one's called me out on it yet, so
I don't think that it matters. You know, call it what you want.
it doesn't. Yeah, exactly. Genres are for marketing people and for historians.
Yeah, so if anyone's on a label right now and you all make IDM, or you're looking for IDM artists, then basically reach out to Hypa, and yeah, you can call it a day.
Yeah, just call it IDM. Call whatever I do that day IDM, and we're done.
Yeah, that's what people do now anyways, right? Is they make something and then say that they invented a new genre.
Yep.
So who's to say any different? So yeah, I'm sorry. Please continue like with the track and stuff. I am curious to see all the other stuff.
Yeah, let's go through the elements. So there's really not a ton here. There's only 20 elements here, maybe. Some of them, unfortunately, being cymatic samples.
Nothing wrong with cymatics.
I know, it's like the meme of it, right?
Right.
But so the first one was a break with let's see. Oh, that's not going to play without the multi-sample. Okay, this was just a break that I used the multi-slice on, and then just randomly arpeggiated, and then kind of modified the gate a little bit to taste.
And so like the arpeggiation on there is set to like random?
It's actually set to high and up.
Okay.
But really all it's doing is just randomly picking out notes to play. So every time you hear, every recording of it is then different slightly.
Right.
Which felt sort of in the vein of the genre to do something like that. As kind of an ambience.
Yeah, definitely.
And then not a lot of processing, very simple EQ, a little bit of OTT. And this is a important PSA I want to just throw out into the world. On the OTT, there is a depth knob and there is a upwards knob. And OTT is a lot better and a lot more applicable if you turn those down a little bit.
Fair enough. Any reason? Well, the depth knob I always kind of used as like a mix knob, right? But what specifically about the high thing? If anything, I feel like if you turn the downwards knob down, it will actually like bring out more of what OTT takes away, I want to say.
Right. So I think it's downward. I think I have it 0 by default because I never use it. Well, because you're using OTT to make something sound like OTT, because everything you put through OTT sounds like OTT.
True.
And then you're ultimately using your depth and your upwards knob to make it sound slightly less like OTT.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think on regards to that, I don't want to spend too much time on that topic in particular, but I always laugh when people are like, "Oh, I don't use this because it sounds too much like this," and I'm like, "Okay, well then you might not want to ever use a phaser or a notch filter or a sine wave or a saw wave, or you know what I mean? Like, so what if it sounds like that? That you want to sound like that because you like that sound."
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason Serum and OTT are so ubiquitous, and it's because they sound really good to our ears.
Exactly. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. That was just my own PSA.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's funny because like, I do my podcast and I'll often ask people their top 5 VSTs, and for I think my first 6 or 7 episodes, Serum was number 1 for all of them.
Yeah.
With every producer I talk to.
Yeah, I can't believe that Serum is still the most popular. I think it might be because of like how easy it is to learn or so, but while Serum is great, there's been so many other things that have come out that I think are. Anyway, yeah,
Right.
yeah, go ahead.
I don't know why my OT, why my yeah, that's odd.
That was cool. I think
Hey,
that
give
you
me a
had
sec.
your input set to, yeah.
Yep, give me a sec on that. Sorry.
Oh, no worries.
So this is it's a hi-hat. I don't know if you guys are hip to those, but it's keeping time. That's what it's doing. So, very complex stuff there. Same with this, that one with the added benefit of reverb on it.
I think that we lost sound again. Can you just hit play on the overall thing again? There we go.
Can you hear me still?
Yeah, it like cuts out for a second and then it picks back up.
Odd. Gotcha.
It's okay. I think that we heard it.
Right. So this one, very, important innovative sound work through using a phaser on an open hi-hat on the offbeats. So just give it a little bit of flavor, I guess.
Sure.
And then here is where kind of the fun came in on the hi-hat, this sound design, which is you have 3 different hi-hats. If I had actually had time to work on this, they would have each been processed more differently. But with a flanger, a panner, and reverb on them, but again, through that arpeggiator, so that it's just hitting random ones every time with a short, long, and medium decay.
Sure.
Okay, that needs to stop happening. Snare, it's just got a little bit of vintage verb on it, not a lot happening. But then I have this reversed snare, which is kind of fun because it's being played forward and reversed, like back to back, for this kind of sucking articulated effect.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot to like the drum design on this, just because it was done with such a lack of time to work on it.
I mean, if it sounds good,
just,
you don't really need to do a whole lot.
Right, but you also don't want to just be, plopping down Matzo samples.
I mean, if they're, they're banger samples, then what can you say? But yeah, I totally get that this was just an idea and stuff too. But I think that this also brings up a good point of like when you're writing, you don't have to get so caught up in being like, I have to make the best snare, I have to make my kick sound like X, Y, and Z. For me personally, I'm so in the habit of doing drum design that like I just knock it out in 5 to 10 minutes or whatever. But beyond that, once I have something that I kind of like, which is kind of I think what is most important, then just write the tune out, and then you can go back and like make the drums really shine later.
All right, exactly. And so if I were to flesh this out, obviously there'd be a lot more thought behind that. I think on the last EP I did, the week before it came out, I changed the kick drum in more than half my tracks, like substantially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and those are the kind of things that like I think is good to revisit after the track is already written and all that. But the thing about like mixing, like some people like talk about mix as you go and all that, and I don't necessarily disagree with it, but in order for you to mix, you have to have other instruments to pit it against. So,
right,
get to a certain point, and then when something kind of is starting to, sound like whatever, or you're noticing something, then I think that would be a good place to start to kind of try to attack maybe some of the issues that you might run into. like I also like think that there's a philosophy behind that where people will automatically mix things because they remember how they mixed it in prior tracks. But if you're using a different sound selection, unless if you're using the exact same sounds from your previous project or a project that you successfully released or whatever, you shouldn't always
Right.
do it that way.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And yeah, I think it's like that part of the good process where the reality is that you just have to rebuild the thing, deconstruct it slightly, and rebuild it over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the only real way to make art, I think.
Yeah, right. I mean, because if you don't and you do try to make the same thing over and over again, then you're not, you know, there's nothing wrong with telling the same story twice. But I think that like if you are going to do that, you should try to tell it from a different perspective, if that makes sense.
Right.
Um, I don't know. There's a lot to be said in that world, but yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So we have the sub here. I do actually have the instance of Serum. Um, not a ton going on. A little bit of FM from a Valley second oscillator and a phaser, pretty aggressive phaser.
Wait, you're not going to tell us where you got your wavetable?
The Val wavetable is like native. I think this came with it.
I'm totally kidding. I don't know if you watch my videos or not, but I just put out a meme video about Serum, and
Oh no, I did see that video. Yeah, that was really funny.
yeah, I'm sorry. I totally threw that at you, but yeah,
No,
yeah,
you're good. That's like my whole game is like throwing people off without them realizing it, or with them realizing it or not.
right. Yeah,
Oh
it's
yeah, here is my new wavetable. You have to use this wavetable to get the sound, and I'm not going to tell you how I made it because the reality is it's taken from one of my farts.
and it's not actually like for sale or for available, but you can copy it and by pushing pause and then just looking at it.
Right.
We
And just slowly drawing it out and just getting a very low fidelity version of it.
just draw it out.
Yeah, I mean, we can go in here and just, go crazy with it.
Oh my gosh.
Press some buttons. Go
Dude,
crazy.
I bet
See?
somebody really would do something like that. That person probably would be me had I not known anything about sound design back in the day. Which is, if you guys are new to sound design, please don't do that. It's not worth it.
Right.
Don't.
Like, I mean, have you seen like how many Skrillex put out that Moon by Power video, like breaking down that track? And have you seen how many like follow-up videos people have made just breaking down elements of what he broke down on that video?
I haven't. I mean, I have seen some of that Moods In project, but not how many follow-up videos people have done for that. But I have a degree of respect for like people that really want to sit down and figure it out, because that takes time to figure this shit out. But at the same time, it's like there's so much fettering that's happening between someone's perception that they think that like they're going to know everything about this project in particular, when really it's about awareness of something that they have no idea about.
Right. Well, I mean, exactly that. It's like, regardless of whether or not someone realizes it, like when you're showing someone how to do something that someone else did, you're always showing your ego's knowledge of how to do that thing, and that there's always things inescapably lost in translation there.
Right. Yeah, there's only so much that you can, like, especially like if you're working in the moment or whatever, you can say the decisions that you made in a particular scenario, but describing what you were feeling in that moment, like you said, especially when it's something that's a lot of stuff or a lot of information,
Right.
other than, I felt hungry so I ate. It's so much more complex than that. But like you said, the problem with it is that somebody might say, well, I did this and I did this, and somebody will start doing that on every single one of their tracks, or they'll say, well, Skrillex did this, so I'm going to do that every time, or somebody did this, so I'm going to do that every time, as opposed to like kind of like what we were talking about before of just trying to tell the same story over and over again, as opposed to having those variations and stuff. And that's why like I don't like the word technique, because when I find that, to me, a technique is like something that you do that solves a single problem. But when you have a skill, I guess let's say you have a skill of sound design, then a lot of times you don't ask those questions about why people make those decisions. You say, oh, okay, well, that makes sense because it makes this relationship work together, right? A skill like solves a bunch of different problems. So I do think
Right.
that some techniques are cool to have in specific scenarios, but they don't really translate to every single song that you throw together.
Right. It's, I guess, less understanding how to make individual sounds and more understanding why specific sounds work in specific contexts.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have nothing else to say on that. That's a great summarization.
Okay, so next sound, you're not going to believe this, but I used a preset in Serum. There's this great preset that you all can download now from my Serum pack called literally just this presets that go into Serum with slight changes made to three of the wavetables, and you're gonna have to find those. And this is the hypersaw layered one that I used for this. I like big 80s sounding synths, and this is one of them. So let's see what that, I guess, sounds like maybe. So that's like the entire harmonic content of the song for the most part. There's this free little towel chorus LX that I use on literally everything.
That's free, isn't it?
Especially like, yeah, it's free and it's amazing. I use it everywhere, especially on like bass sounds.
Yeah, cool.
A little bit of OTT because it's a super saw and it needs it. And then the way you do side chaining in Bitwig. Is this how you do side chaining in Bitwig, or how do you do it?
No, well, it depends. Confession time. So OTT is great, right? In the past, actually the past 7 tracks that I put out, I just put an OTT on the master and set it at 50% and let that do all the work. But if I were actually going to do sidechaining, then what I do is I set up an audio sidechain to a tool and then just duck the audio or duck the volume. And then
Right. I mean,
I also have Gatekeeper if I'm working in MIDI, but yeah, that's typically what I would do is I would just set like an overall sidechain group and everything that's not the kick and snare have in a completely separate group, and then just have the transients kind of pull the volume down of that. Because I personally don't really prefer to do like compression. I just like to do like volume sidechain, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I guess sonically with what you're going for, I like things very crispy. So I just use a ton of compression everywhere.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just an aesthetic. It's really just an aesthetic choice.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing too, right? Like all of these functions exist for a reason. So, use whatever you find is useful.
Right, absolutely. Question: do you know a way to reverse the gate in Bitwig, or can you not do that?
I'd have to take a look, to be honest, off the top of my head. I don't typically use a gate, to be honest.
Gotcha. Because I heard about a way to do sidechaining in Ableton, which is you basically put a gate and you invert it, and then you put a release on that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know how to do that in Bitwig.
I think, can you pull a gate up really quick?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let me just.
Yeah, I want to say no. You can't.
Right, well, I mean, I think looking at the device, you would say that. I just didn't know if you had found kind of a workaround to that sort of technique.
I mean, you might be able to if there's a way to kind of flip some shit, or like maybe you can kind of have like maybe use a modulator or something. But off the top of my head, no, I don't know in particular.
I mean, one thought would be to do a kind of like a reverse sidechain.
Right. Or I was even thinking like flipping the phase, yeah, of something, but that would be like a modular thing that I would do. Like maybe you
Right,
can.
but it might be a cool effect to just, instead of having just like a click tick, you have the opposite. You just have like a really long drawn out sound that only plays when the kick is not.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know, like it's so crazy because like if you don't really dive into Bitwig's modulators and stuff, like at first glance, all of the tools on here like are basic as shit, and you will be
Oh, yeah.
really disappointed. But once everything kind of opens up in that way, um, man, there's just so much stuff that you can do. Like I don't know if you ever watch Polarity's tutorials and stuff, but like as much as I know
All the
about,
time.
or as much as I appear to know about sound design, sorry, I really wanted that to come off not as what it
No,
did.
Alckemy, everyone's here to talk to hear you. You know, they know you're a genius. It's all good.
I totally disagree. I have no life is what it is. But yeah, like Polarity has like some of the smartest shit, and I'm just like, man, how did you come up with this? Like, what did you? I don't know. It's awesome. It's a completely different world. But I'm sure that I would ask him. I'm sure that he probably has some workaround with all that.
Yeah, that's probably a good way to go about it. Anyway, I guess on to the next sound. That's what people are here to talk about, hear about, the sounds, not our personal petty gripes with Bitwig was laid out.
We're doing a great job of selling this product today, aren't we?
Yeah, we really are. So this is the Arpeggiator. So this is also such a random, which I've never really done on an Arpeggiator. Or I guess on a melodic sound, I've never just let the kind of Arpeggiator do what it wants to do.
Have you are you on 3.28?
Yes, I am.
Have you ever set up an arpeggiator selector?
Oh, like a gate, like a trans gate kind of thing.
Sort of. So like if you were to group an arpeggiator and then like have multiple ones and then set a randomizer on the selector itself, then you can get like different.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, you can get different rhythms and stuff on that. So like, and they'll be like super syncopated. I don't know if that would actually work in this particular track, but just as far as like exploration and stuff goes, yeah, you just like you throw the arpeggiator thing into like what is it called? A selector chain. And then once you throw the randomizer on there, then you can kind of alternate between the different arpeggiator settings that you have.
Right. So you said it. Yeah, no, I get what you're saying.
And like I think that like the reason why I mentioned doing it that way as opposed to just putting a randomizer on like the speed and time of things is because while you do get randomizations between the choices that you have, you're closing the amount of parameters of which it can select in between. So it's very specific. So instead of like trying to find a range in between 1/8 and anything else, you have one that's set at like 1/4, 1/8, or 1/2, and it's always going to be between one of those, even though that selection will be random.
Right.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not trying to get into that mode or whatever.
No, that's.
I find that new, I think that was with the 3.2.8 update where you kind of have that selection thing, opened up a lot of possibilities and stuff, like especially if you do arpeggiators with like a drum rack that's like a 128. Like, oh man, there's so much shit that you can do with it.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it. I'll probably be diving into that after this. But as far as the sound, I guess, is concerned, another preset, the Juno bells, because I wanted a bell sound and I had 5 minutes left to work on the track.
Did you set a timer on this whenever you made it?
Yeah, no, so this was to be made between the hours of 9:40 and 11 p.m. for me last night.
Fair enough. Right on.
So it was specifically at that time, and the other guy finished before me anyway, so I kind of had extra impetus to kind of hurry up. But this technique that I borrowed from like what the guitar players do in Radiohead, that I've been using on tracks now, is like stacking delays. I don't know how much you've experimented with that.
I'm sorry, I'm just kind of curious to where you're going with it before.
Because you have like the delays bouncing off of each other, right?
Right.
And it just, I think it builds just more atmosphere if that's kind of the role of the instrument you're working with. It's a very good thing to do.
Sure.
As opposed to just having kind of like a basic ping pong delay going in both ears.
Yeah, so you have a single delay here that's set to just like, you know, whatever feedback that is, and then that's feeding into the delay 2, which looks like those two are set to 2 different times, so that way you get a complete stereo bounce, as opposed to one or the other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to. I didn't want to like speak before I knew exactly what was going on. But no, that's not really something that I do in particular, other than feed a reverb into delay. But I think that is something that is pretty neat, and I think that's like a much cleaner way to add depth as opposed to reverb. Like, do you ever find yourself like overdoing the fuck out of reverb, and it totally starts to like destroy your mix?
Oh, constantly. I think it's a big gripe I have with a lot of the way that a lot of reverbs are set up by default, because I guess whether or not we like to think about it, like subconsciously, we like react a lot to the way that something is set up when we open it up, and it influences the way we behave in it. And a lot of reverbs are set up so that they're like mixes at 100% by default, and I think it subconsciously leads us to using way too much reverb.
Yeah, I agree. I would encourage everybody to actually experiment more with trying to create space through delays as opposed to just a consistent wall of sound.
Right, because when you get things bouncing, it's like you have like this built-in like kind of the complexity of the syncopation just adds up so easily in such a pleasing way.
Right. There's still an element that keeps cohesion, right? As opposed to just blowing something up with space.
Yeah, exactly.
We're hearing his song through his mic, no? No, it's through the audio. It's just Zoom, and I think the quality of Zoom. Listen, the amount of work we had to put in to get this working.
Look,
Give the man a break.
Look, I am a EDM podcaster first and a producer second, guys.
Fair enough. Yeah, we definitely should discuss that before we hop off. But yeah, that is a cool
Yeah.
track. That's something I'll mess with later as well.
And then I threw a phase 90 at the end of it, and then an imager, and I'm not quite sure why the dynamics are at the end of the chain. They definitely shouldn't be, or like why the side chain is at the end of the chain, but it probably shouldn't be.
I don't know. That sounds like something I would do. Why wouldn't you put the sidechain there?
Because then I guess your delays aren't reacting. Your delays aren't reacting to it. No, I might. No, I'm wrong about this. I have this flipped. No, it should absolutely be there.
Yeah, because like, if the
So that way
delays,
your delays aren't reacting to the duct sound; they're reacting to the whole sound.
right, yeah, and that way, well, the sidechain is ducking those sounds during the kick and snare, so that way that those still kind of cut through. I mean, I can see why you wouldn't do that if you have something that's a little bit less present in the mix, but I think that for this in particular, this is standing out or pretty prominent, so I definitely would duck that out. I think you made the right choice. I think my dogs also agree that you made the right choice.
Yeah, they're advocating in a positive way, I think, which is good.
Bork. That means sidechain at the end of your as the last element of your FX chain.
Right. Well, I mean, I think all relationships with animals are on some level projection. So do what you will with that.
Fair enough. In other words, I'm psycho because my dogs are too.
Right. No, your dogs are psycho because you're projecting your own psychosis on them.
Well, yeah. I'll take it. whatever the reasoning, like the result is the same.
Right. Probably don't need to go into these. I mean, they're very basic. It's just a little rhythmic fill. Innovative stuff. And then there's the sound of a fire, the kindling of a fire in the background, because it's IDM, so you need a lot of background noises.
True.
Same thing with, damn it. Same thing with this generator. It's just white noise, just filling up space. But that is processed a little bit. I auto-tuned the white noise.
That's interesting.
And yeah, I don't know if it's doing anything, but I kind of like the idea of auto-tuning, just like any sort of random sound where you can tell there's pitch happening.
Sure. I think that like
Uh,
it is a cool thing that you brought this up too, though, because if anybody doesn't know, like adding white noise, just a subtle amount of white noise can really help build the rest of your track out. So like if you're listening to a tune or something and like you feel like it's empty, sometimes just having just a little bit of that will really make it feel like nice and full and thick. Avin
right.
says reverb is like smearing with colors. It looks really cool, but makes something more natural. But too much smearing and you end up with a blob of brown. Yeah, I agree with
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Sorry, what were you gonna say on that topic?
Oh, I didn't really have anything.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I guess moving on to the last sound here, we have more, just technical innovation. We have an 808. Don't know if you guys know what those are. You guys heard these?
No, I never heard that before, but it makes me want to like go to clubs and shake my butt.
It makes me want to sit in a car and listen to music for some reason.
So these are just 808s that you have as the intro.
Yeah, so in the intro you have them, but going into the bridge, I reversed one, which doesn't really do anything, but I didn't know that when I was making it, and I was running out of time. So
Fair enough.
not much to say there. Let's get into my master chain. I have never done this before, and probably will not do it again. But I did use OTT on my master here.
What? Come on.
As you can see, the depth is at 50%. Or depth is 70%. The upward is at 50%. So we are reducing the OTT-ness of the OTT. And then we have Ozone 9 elements, very innovative stuff. We have on the mid side, we do have some reduction. On the imager, we are boosting it a little bit. And on the maximizer, we're pulling it up a bit. It didn't really need a lot to get to the loudness I wanted it to be at. And then, a peak limiter set to the ubiquitous negative 0.3 dB.
Pop tunes. Nice. So, is there anything that like now that within, of course, like yeah, I know that you wouldn't say that this track is done or whatever, but is there anything in particular that you would want to change about this, or that you would like want to go more in depth now that you kind of have a particular structure with?
I think like we were talking about, the drum design needs, probably a few days of work.
Yeah.
Um, the arpeggiation could probably be turned into something kind of more melodic, and also something that I could kind of get into Bitwig's modulators and really have a lot of fun with giving slight variation to each different hit of it.
Yeah, sure. I like asking this kind of question when people send in works in progresses, because I think that like just talking about ideas, even if they don't know what to do, or just like expanding on that in a theoretical way, can sometimes be an excellent kind of approach to helping push someone towards finishing the track, right? Like I'm sure within everybody here, we've gotten to a certain point of our song where we're like, I don't know what to do with this anymore. But as opposed to like trying to force ourselves to make a decision on something, sometimes it's cool to just be like, well, what if this, or what if this, or what if this? And so that's kind of where the question came from.
Right, that makes sense.
So yeah, I mean, this is really cool. And I do think that like, even though what you covered and stuff isn't like, how do I say this? Even though what you covered is pretty straightforward and all that, like there's still a lot of things that I can appreciate about this submission that I think are some things that are often overlooked. Like for one, like some of the individual like little things that you incorporated, like the white noise and all that, and like the delay and stuff. But most of our tracks start like this, and I think that like being able to see the relationship of like not going from something or to something, and like having the ability to kind of see how everything kind of stacks up on each other at this stage is actually really beneficial to a lot of people. Um, especially like I don't know, like even for me, as long as I've been doing this, sometimes I still open my DAW and I'm like, I don't know where to start, or I don't know what I want to do, or you know what I mean? I'm kind of like
Right,
frozen
absolutely.
with choice paralysis. So
Right,
to
and then you sit on YouTube and you watch tutorials, and then you realize you've passed a year and not made a song.
exactly, and then like you at that point you don't even want to go back and then try it. You just want to sit and think about what you saw on YouTube, and then you get hungry, and then you know there's all those other factors that start to become involved. But I can definitely like have a large amount of appreciation for like anybody that's willing to open up their project files, whether they're done or not, because I always feel like there's something to learn um, with everything that somebody has, some like everything that somebody has to show. If that makes sense, no matter how big or small.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you're looking into their mind, and especially with, I didn't think this anyone would ever, see this one. Whereas if I opened up something, like let me open another track, which I guess would be more suiting or more fitting. Um, like if I opened up something that was actually organized, um, let's open up the pre-mixed down version of this. You can see how different just like the type of thinking is, right?
Yeah,
From like track to track. This wasn't the one I meant to open up, but
that's okay.
um,
But you are right. Yeah. The as you start pulling ideas together, a lot of times in the way that you structure things can also change as well, because there's no one way to do something, right? And kind of like what you showed us today, it's just a way to get something started within an hour and a half time. You know?
right. And it's a way you did it on that specific project, and it's not dogmatic in any way. Because
Yeah, for
I mean,
sure.
this is probably how I would organize. This is actually fairly well organized. This is how I would typically organize a track. Like you would see the references at the top, and then things kind of broken down in this sort of way.
Right. Yeah, and that's a cool way to like putting your reference directly on the timeline is a great way to kind of like decipher how to structure your song, or you know, if there is one particular element, which I would also like warn people about trying to be too close to, like the difference between making a song and then trying to remake your reference, you know, there's something to be said for that. But you know, when being mindful or like keeping awareness within that, I think that's a great tool that people should use.
Right. And I think a tool I've been using a lot lately, and I think I use a lot in general with both, um, you know, music and architecture, is I'll take something I love and figure out what I hate about it.
Right on.
Well, right, because like I think I did this on one of these songs, which was just kind of almost a cheap knockoff of Dead Mouse's Cat Thruster.
Hmm.
But I was listening to it and I was like, I didn't realize it until I dissected. I was like, this song is really repetitive and not a lot of things are changing
Yeah,
on
yeah.
the repeats. And so it's like, well, I love the song. I can, pick out those reasons I hate it, and, then make something that has those changes to it. And then, it, I'm not, as long as I'm not borrowing the melodies, it's mine now.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really cool way to do that. There's a lot of funny banter that can be exchanged in between that mindset, you know, because I don't know, sometimes I hear something that I want to make and I'm like, oh, it's perfect, you know, but having the ability to keep subjectivity even within even within your own things that you appreciate can be an excellent way to figure out how to do something different, you know, as opposed to just being like, well, this is so great and this is what I need to have. It can also be like, you know, like you could do there's no right or wrong way to reference, right? And I think that
Right.
is another topic that could easily, you know, have a lot of time spent on, of being like how to actually reference in a way that will set you up to be more successful, as opposed to just using the reference to try to copy the song. But that is really cool. I'm glad that you did bring that up, because that's pretty smart actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's how I write. I mean, because as an architect, I'm used to having a context. I'm used to having, okay, this is what the requirements the building needs to satisfy, and this is where the building's going. And I think artistically, I can work a lot better within that. So if I take like, okay, here is this song, and what I want to do is I want to do I want to identify what I don't like about it, and then I want to make the version of it that I would love.
Yeah.
Then I think it gets me out of my own way creatively.
Man, that's a really cool concept that I would most likely consider in other ways more too. Because I never like most of the time whenever I think about music, I don't ever think about what I don't like. I try to just point out the things that I do enjoy. But I think it is important to, um, I mean, unless if I'm giving like feedback on something, right? That's a totally different
Right,
story.
right.
But when there's a finished piece of music from an artist that I admire, and I usually tend to overlook those things as opposed to be like, ah man, like why did they why did they do that in that particular way? So but yeah, man, that was really cool. Within all of you guys that are in chat, do any of you guys have any questions for him before we kind of wrap up closing things? I still want to ask him about a few more things regarding his own personal projects because he does a lot of like podcasting and things on the side as well. But if anybody has anything production related, then I would like to know. But there is a chat delay, so while that's there, we'll kind of bounce back and forth. So yeah, you were saying that you're a content creator or like podcaster, or I think that you use a different term. Sorry for me forgetting, but you're that first, and then a producer second. So tell us about your
Right.
other projects that you have.
Yeah, no, so I guess at this point, just because, I'm fairly busy with, my real work, I guess would be a way to say it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this is more the, this is more a silencing of the creative kind of demon that lives within me more than anything.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you have that, by the way?
Not in particular, to be honest. Like I feel like it's never silenced and it's ever growing. Like once I figured out like my first like professional creative job was like circus stuff, right? Um
Right.
so
Well, I guess I meant more so, do you have that thing where if like you aren't being creative enough and producing enough creative work, you become like physically and kind of mentally unwell?
oh yeah, I'm sorry. I misinterpreted the question. Absolutely. Like if I don't do that, then I'm a completely different person, and usually that person is somebody that I don't like.
Right, same, yeah.
um yeah, it definitely it's become such a big part of my life already, for better or for worse, that I have to be doing something. And if I'm not, like, I think the first thing to hit me is guilt. The second thing to hit me is usually like depression, because I'm like, I feel like I'm not able to be myself in most of the moments of the world of my life. And then like there's like these stages, I guess, right? And then it becomes like I'm angry because I can't, like, I have so much emotional content with nowhere to put it. Yeah, with nowhere to put it. So I'm not angry by nature, but just in that sense, like it is frustrating to be like, like I just need to get this out. And I would say that, like, to be honest, music in particular isn't how I do that. Um,
Interesting.
but it is a catalyst, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of one of those things that kind of help kind of uh, kickstart the other things. Like for me, like I have to be throwing punches and kicks at the air or at a focus mitt or something for me to kind of express all those things. But I find that there's this duality between those relationships of, like, for me, I do think about expression a lot and shaping the expression. So they kind of start to fuel each other, where I start thinking about movement in terms of music, and then I start thinking about music in terms of movement, and they kind of just have this nice like correlation between the two.
Right, that makes sense.
Uh, but yeah, but I mean, I guess, like, what about you? Like, we were talking about, when I was telling you about your architectural things, about like how cool and like how creative that must be and stuff. But I remember you mentioning how actually it can be so specific because you're dealing on a clientele basis, right? And sometimes like their demands are so specific that you don't really have a lot of creative freedom.
Well, I guess it's less that. It's just that, it's, um, I think in the way most people produce music, there's not a lot of artistic compromise that happens. And I don't want to like say either one is better or worse. They're just different modes. But architecture is a game of compromise. You have, your client's needs, you have your own needs, you have the needs of, the people on your team, on an architectural level, or, the needs of the guy who wants to make sure the building doesn't collapse.
Right.
And then you have the needs of the guy who is overseeing the construction. Then you have the needs of the guy who's building the thing. Then you have the needs of the guy who's actually doing the building.
Do you ever?
And so you never have one single decision maker. It's a constant flow of figuring out how to consistently make everyone as happy as possible and produce an end product that the client is happy with.
I mean, do you ever feel like in regards to that though, like maybe like you do make creative compromises just by like, for one, the limits of your own imagination, but two, perhaps like the limits of your skill set?
Oh, 100%. I mean, and even thinking about these things in that way is a limiting belief in itself, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Because we're accepting a capacity. I think I had talked with somebody else about that in person. About like the idea or like real capacity versus like imaginative capacity, or whatever, however you want to categorize that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like our frameworks in which we start to shape our perceptions definitely like are a limit in that own way.
Right. Everything you kind of grow to rely on in terms of how you understand the world and the way you interact with it then becomes something that's going to affect your creativity in some way, positive or negative.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just catching up on chat. It's Greedo is saying, for me, good music, which in general means great chord progressions and melody, surpasses the genre thing. It can also be the sound design or creative idea. So context, right? I think is kind of what you're getting at. Young says,
Right, absolutely.
Architecture has a lot of creativity into it, I guess. Same as being a beat maker, it needs to fit the needs of a client, but requires good creativity as well. Yeah. I guess like in some cases though, like between kind of like, I think what he's talking about from like specific experience and stuff is that like, while there might be a creative process that goes into building, the design of their client and stuff, I feel like there's so much restriction and so much more between somebody being able to express and just kind of like produce a product, if that makes sense,
Right.
which I think is a big difference. It's almost like,
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I was getting at. And I think also when you're doing music at, a very high level, I think you have the exact same kind of limits on yourself.
yeah, I was gonna say too, like I feel like a parallel between that is like, say you have done a specific kind of music or your particular aesthetic for so long, and you feel like if you make something different, like you're going to be abandoned, right? Or like you have to produce a specific kind of content for a label, right? Like that only
Right,
does house
exactly.
music. You can't submit an experimental track and expect them to release it.
Right. And then, you have to kind of find the things you think will work to, keep making you money because you have, if you have a team underneath you, that kind of is important that you keep doing the thing you do in a way that those people keep being fed.
Right. Yeah. Can't abandon the team. Unless if you're a one-man team, then you can do whatever you want.
Right. And I think that's kind of what I'm sort of getting at is that I think personally it's very important that I have a sort of unhinged, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but an uncompromised way of working from time to time as a way to release things.
Yeah, would it be safe to say like, you don't have any this is something where you don't have any external restrictions over, right? It's all just you.
Right. There's very, very little pressure to produce something that I'm not terribly interested in. I think with the podcast, even more so than with the music.
Well, tell me a little bit more about that. I mean, I've been luckily, I've been fortunate to be a guest on your show a couple weeks ago, but it's like what is that whole project about?
So I guess I kind of came into moderating this server that someone else started um, called The Sync, maybe in, I guess, March or May, right around the time that quarantine hit.
Mm-hmm.
And I had previously ran like a 12-person server that was sort of unrelated. And I told him I had moderation experience. And we talked about what he wanted to do with the place. And he made me a moderator based on that. And then over time, really, Yunk and I kind of took this thing, which had a massive base at the beginning, had like 1,000 members, but like no real direction. And just 1,000 people just kind of, randomly sort of interacting within this framework.
Right.
Jung and I kind of gave it a sort of specific direction, and over time, I kind of gave more of this direction with these weekly challenges I was putting on, where I would just kind of do more off the wall challenges than just say a sample pack,
Yeah, for sure. And oh, sorry, go ahead.
Like right now, I'm running this competition, which is like a full on like 12-week production competition, which is just challenging different aspects of production. Like last week it was just only making a drum beat. This week it's only making melodic elements and only using one VST. And then next week it's going to be like only using like a non 4/4 time signature. And it's challenging production in different ways to get people, I guess, out of their own heads and out of their own modalities.
Yeah, I think that's really cool that you've kind of stepped into a community leader position, right? Where you are kind of trying to grow the consciousness and raise the skill level of the community that chooses to interact with your server.
Right.
And
I think I can serve the production community a lot better in that role than as someone who makes music, I guess.
is that something that like that you I guess how do I say it? Like, would you prefer to be leading and by doing music, or is this like more of a choice thing for you just because you find that you have a more so of a knack for it, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I get what you're saying. You're kind of asking if this is a sort of rewritten narrative because like I'm much better at producing rather than what I actually want to be doing instead of production.
Right.
And I think no, I don't agree. I think for me it's like I enjoy doing that a lot more. I get a lot more satisfaction out of just being able to, enable young artists
Yeah.
than I do, if I was to just keep making songs. I think I can have a better effect on the community.
Yeah. Right on. And I
And
think
I
like,
think
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
and I think I'm offering something different by not being some, like very good producer at the top, by just being just a guy and just sort of being incredibly democratic about what I'm doing.
I definitely can agree with the mindset of things. I think that like even production skill set is something that is subjective because
Oh, absolutely.
it's not yeah, it has to be. There's who's to say who's a better producer than who, unless if it's like totally polarizing of somebody who just started making music and doesn't give a crap versus somebody who's been doing it for 20 years. But as we
Right.
continue to gain experience, that margin does begin to shrink more and more, I believe, and the gray area tends to get more dense. But at the same time, yeah, I did like to ask you that question just because, like, I think that for me personally, I do have to make sure that I balance that myself. Because for me personally, the music does come first. And
Right.
As much fun as I have being a content creator, and like as much fun as like it's been building community and stuff, like I'm definitely selfish in that manner of like the whole point of why I started doing all this stuff in the first place was because I was a music producer. And
Yeah, I mean, but there's also something very selfish about me saying, "Hey, everyone make a track like this," and then at the end of the week, getting 12 DMs of people who've made tracks according to this sort of archetypal vision I had for it. So I mean, there's ego in both, really.
yeah, I suppose like I mean, and that's true, but at the same time, like the outcome or prediction of that, or like sorry, the byproduct of that is still going to yield a lot more than me trying to build a community because I think that my music is good enough, like
Right.
yeah, everybody should follow my Discord because my music is the shit or whatever. Like, no.
Well, to be fair, it is, and they should.
I mean, thank you, but I mean the same could be said about, about your stuff, about, about Young's stuff, about Greedo's music, about everybody that's in here, right? Because
Right.
everybody
Well, I
does
mean,
have value.
Well, that's why I kind of came up with that model. Is I just took what the prevalent model I saw, which is these kind of master producers, with like these communities built around them, and I just completely flipped it. I mean, my podcast does the same thing. I refuse to have anyone on that has more than 10,000 followers on any one social media platform because I want to keep it, kind of for and by obscure producers. I mean, I'm just because you kind of get tired of when you listen to a podcast and it's just you only listen to it because of who's on it.
Right. Same.
Whereas I think if you can, get to a level where people are listening to because they know, like, okay, so and so is always going to have like some cool person I've never heard of on it, then that's a lot more valuable to the community than just someone that you've already heard of going on someone else's podcast to say something that's very well rehearsed, 5 points that they want to get to during the podcast. For me, most of the people I interview don't know. I mean, and you being an exception, don't know how to talk for 2 hours about production.
Right. Yeah.
And they're kind of figuring it out for the first time when I'm talking to them, but it's still conveying something behind electronic music, which I can think can often appear like it doesn't have a lot of personality behind it from a very prosaic level.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think that it is good because we all have a voice, and the more that we can help people who want to say things kind of express that, I think that that's a really healthy thing for the community. But also kind of touching on that topic too, like while I might be more liberal about who I have on the podcast, if people just want to shoot the shit, like that's what Discord is for, right? I don't think that there needs to be a pre-recorded podcast that people should tune into, but that's why I like to do some kind of like tutorial-esque thing or some kind of like production side of thing, because getting to know somebody can mean a lot of different things. Like it's one thing to get to know you, who you are as a person. It's another thing to get to know who you are as an artist. And I think what I find the most rewarding is figuring out how you think. And once I can understand how you think, then I can draw a point of relativity, and I can pull from that in a selfish way for sure. But I think that that's also giving everybody else that same kind of access,
Right. Yeah. I think that's the goal.
Yeah, it's super cool. And yeah, and I really appreciate you being on here. I hope that you had as much fun as I did, and same for everybody in the chat. Do you want to plug in your social, or is there anything that you would like to discuss regarding like your own personal projects and all that? Because we got a little bit of time left. I don't want to keep you on for too much longer, but I definitely would like to know what you have going on. Yeah.
Let's see what I have going on. Weekly episodes of EDM Obscura. You can sort of find that anywhere you find podcasts, I guess.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you just there for a second. Will you send me a link when we hop off Discord, so that way I can put it in the description of this video whenever it uploads, which will be immediately as soon as we're done with this?
Yeah, because I think that's sort of the main thing I'm trying to, I want to say promote, but we did launch a Patreon with that, with the idea being that we can start, funding these weekly challenges more that we're doing in the sync.
Yeah, awesome.
So once we start reaching a mildly substantial amount of money to the point where it would make sense, 40% of everything we make on that Patreon is going to go to just giving people sending people like a pizza or something random, for winning a challenge on the server.
Yeah, that's cool. Think of it like a potluck challenge of some sort.
Right.
Well, I guess, I mean, not everybody gets something out of it, but it does give some incentive to continue to keep boosting those things. It's people like to be rewarded,
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, you've got the Discord, and you've got the Patreon thing that you just launched. What about your music personally? Is there anywhere that people can go to find that?
Yeah, if you want to go on Spotify or Apple Music or what have you, I'm sort of DistroKid, so it's kind of everywhere. It's just Hypatekt, and look that up. I have an EP that was a result of a 7-week challenge on my server. So all 6 songs are made in the span of 7 weeks. You actually participated in this thing.
Cool.
And yeah, the goal was I wanted to actually finish some music. So I thought other people might want to finish some music too, and put up the challenge, and a bunch of people finished some music through it. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah, that is cool. And regarding on that topic, since like I think that, it's also cool that you're participating as well. But in regards to that, do you have any like upcoming music as well, or any like personal projects other than this cool little demo thing that you put together? Any other releases that you have planned?
Um, album July next year.
Cool. Sweet. Yeah. Please post that when the time comes in my own Discord channel and stuff. And that's kind of, I like to do that. I really like giving people an outlet to share their music and stuff, because everybody needs a place somewhere to start, right? Where
Right.
excuse me, somewhere to start to where they feel is a safe place to promote, that isn't going to, for one, piss a bunch of people off, and also isn't going to be completely ignored.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of the gatekeepers at the higher levels of the community are making it very hard to share your music with other producers and, the public at large. And you kind of have to fight to sort of create places where that can still happen.
Yeah, and I think that like by taking an internal approach of thanks, Greedo, of interpersonal interaction with communities, um, I think is a great way to kind of do that. And because who else would you really? I don't know. For me personally, like I can't think of anybody else that would want to hear my music other than producers, because
Right.
I find that they're going to be the most relatable audience beyond anybody else. Like for example, like I played The Source of Nightmares for my grandma, and she didn't really have a whole lot to say about it other than being weirded out, right? Because my personality doesn't match my music by any means. But if I sent it to somebody like you, or I sent it to anybody in the chat or something, and I'm like, hey, this is where my mindset was, and this sound design and all that stuff, like now I've opened the door for a discussion. Now I've opened the door for exploration beyond the project that I've made. And that's, I think that ultimately is going to be more valuable to people in that manner.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, unless you're trying to, mass market things. And even then, there's nothing, I think there's a lot of value in, sending something to a feedback channel on a Discord server 2 or 3 times before you have it where you want it to be. And then, spending money to promote it or whatever.
Right. Right. And maybe it could just be like, I don't know how far or how much you've dove into that world of Hypatekt, of, how do I say, like diving into the professional, like I'm going to release music for money aspect of things. But I never came into this whole project expecting to get big, or expecting to, make a ton of money just from the music that I make. And I
Right.
find that the relationships that I've developed, because I've kind of let go of that, have been a lot more genuine, as
Yeah, I
opposed
know. I
to,
think,
yeah, just trying to like seek out managers and shit, right? And be like, yo, bro,
right.
like, can you play my banger or whatever?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, I think that's, you have to kind of build yourself within your community first, generally,
Right,
if you want to have any enduringness to it.
right. It has
But I
to.
mean, also with, I guess, the level I'm operating at, as operating mostly as a podcaster is very good for me because it requires a lot less time commitment. And I can, when my work picks up, it picks up and I can have a very demanding schedule. And I'd like to keep this at a level where I don't have to, where I don't have to compromise on how hard I go into it, but I can sort of sustain it in a meaningful way.
Right. Yeah.
And
And that's always, a battle as well. Sorry, I'm just responding to Tony really quick. I could have just said it out, but um yeah, man, it's always, everything is always a matter of balance and stuff. And I think that like it's so cool to see how all of these people that have all these different kinds of professions and stuff, just have a place to meet up and just talk about shit regarding this. Like it really
right,
is no different. Like back in the day, I used to be really into well, I still am into gaming and stuff, but like, like Pokemon cards, or like Yu-Gi-Oh or something, right? Where they'd have tournaments at a card shop on Fridays. And now it's just kind of like one of those instances where I geek out over sound design and shit, and it's like I can just have immediate access to it, and forget about what's going on in the real world and just talk about musical shit.
Right, absolutely. And I
Um,
think, yeah, it's vitally important, and it's something you would easily take for granted, but, creating places where you can do that are welcoming and accepting of people isn't, something that's the default position.
right.
I mean, look at what Reddit was, 10 years ago versus what Reddit is now.
Yeah. It's Reddit is a ever evolving amalgamation of a creature that is just highly volatile. Um, Still some good stuff on there too, by all means, but it definitely has changed so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I
Well,
guess that's just sort of my sort of greater point about community building, because I think that's sort of what I'm more interested in at this point.
me too. And kind of like what Tony was saying too, though, about like being mindful about things getting bigger and whatnot. I kind of believe that as long as the community grows, the support system has to grow to sustain it. I feel,
Right.
and
Well, I mean, and you have to create a community where people are sort of bought into the way that that community operates so that it can scale.
exactly right. And not to make it a cult or anything, but I find that
Right.
people that stay active in my community generally share a lot of the same kind of like not necessarily even like values or whatever, but there's just kind of a way that the community operates, if that makes sense. And
Right. And I think personally, I'm like very active in kind of trying to enforce that in some ways. Like when I have like collab challenges, I'll actively put people who are like lightly active on the server with like my mods and like people who haven't been around, who've been around for a while,
mm,
just to um, kind of get them into that mode of thinking
right.
and to like build that connection to the community in the way that it operates.
Yeah, I think personally I'm a little bit more subtle about it, but like I get a lot of DMs actually from my Discord, and I actually enjoy those quite a bit. I mean, I've had a few DMs that are kind of like, all right, but for the most part, it's a lot of people just being like asking questions in particular and all that other stuff. But I do appreciate those, and I do like those messages and all those things because it means that people are asking questions. And if people are asking questions and like it's keeping a sense of wonder, then I think that the information that those people gather are going to still circumvent within the community itself. And that's kind of what helps kind of keep those things thrive.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I had a great time chatting with you today. I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate you having the patience to get the sound thing figured out. Is there any closing thoughts that you'd like to have before we end the podcast?
I'm kind of good. Like I said, just the podcast.
Oh, I did have a question. How can people reach out to you? If like, I guess I don't know if you seek out them or if you take submissions and stuff, but I'm wondering if anybody, or if you'd be interested in having maybe even some of the people that are in the chat come and talk with you on the podcast, because there's a few people in here that I could definitely see or would like to hear their thoughts on.
I would love that so much. Yeah, no, it is a good week for me when I can get, my guests come to me organically.
Yeah, right. Um,
And like I can just, because I mean I'm not operating to the level you are. I've only gotten, maybe 4 or 5 of my guests where it was like, hey, can I come on? And I'd obviously love to get to a point where I can, have that instead of having to like reach out to people I think are interesting.
yeah,
Not that there's anything wrong with that, but
for
yeah, if
sure.
anyone wants to come on, a lot of what I've been doing that I think people really like doing is they'll, we'll listen to one of their songs and they'll, break it down, I guess, on a more prosaic level.
Yeah.
Because I guess more of my podcast is a lot more philosophy than it is production because, we don't have like a DAW, it's just audio.
Right, right. I think that it was pretty refreshing being on your podcast because I didn't have to be prepared to teach, which is fine. I've been doing that for a long time, but sometimes I don't really want to do that. I just want to discuss. And
Right.
it's totally like polar opposite of like the way that I hold my podcast or whatever, but maybe that's why is because I'm so like always 100% teaching oriented, and maybe in some way part of the reason why I like having guests come on and teach, it means that I don't have to.
Right, right. I'm just kind of a chatty bitch, so
I'll leave you with the chatty thing. The other stuff is to be determined. We'll see over time, but that's at your own discretion. But yeah, does anybody else have anything in the chat that you might want to ask, or any kinds of questions or anything? I think we're probably about ready to wrap things up.
sounds good.
Yeah, I'll just maybe wait like 30 seconds or so. I guess while I'm waiting to see if anybody has anything or any other input to add, are there any like plugins or VSTs that you've been kind of keeping an eye on?
Um, let's see. Let me go through my top 5 VSTs. I've been getting really into Valhalla Vintage Verb, even though I hate the way it interacts with Bitwig.
Is it just like not compatible or not friendly?
No, I will show you here because we have the technology now. So when you click on it and you go to your presets, you can't see the room one. You have to pull it up to get to the room one. And the room one is where most of the presets I use are.
Oh, I see.
So I find that very frustrating.
Yeah, that is annoying.
Also, the fact that it is by default set to 100 is bad, I think.
Yeah, is there not a way that you can set a default?
I think I could, but I would have to set it for every preset I use.
Oh, I see. That makes sense. Yeah.
How Supermassive is cool. I'm getting really into like using like remakes of like crappy guitar pedals as like a sound processing thing, as opposed to just like amps, because I know like a lot of people will use like guitar amp emulators on like bass design and stuff, but like things like this, like Univibe, and it's like such a lo-fi plugin that it doesn't even have. It's like a 32-bit, and it doesn't have an actual interface. It just has like the few knobs at the bottom. But like things like that, and like that Phase 90 I used, I'm like really into using like kind of odd things like that. There's this thing called Pig Pie, which is a recreation of a Russian Big Muff.
Oh, cool.
And just makes things sound like gnarly as hell.
Yeah, it sounds great as long as you don't call my mom that.
Well, if the shoe fits.
Those are some big shoes to fill. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, that's cool. I do like, as much as I hate analog, I find that like anything that's distortion related, I'm all about. So, amps or pedals or anything of the sort is usually really cool because it has such a different characteristic to it.
Right. And I think that like, analog emulation is kind of like a zero-sum game, and not the greatest thing in the world for production. Just like say like, what was really the great in the future of music is synths from the 80s.
Right, like they're gonna love it. They've never even heard of it. It's totally unexpected. So here it is again.
Right. I think that's like maybe a bad modality to go about things with, but as far as like just small things to tweak, rather than building, your sound around like Roland and Arturia emulations, I guess, is probably a way I'd prefer to work.
Yeah. What about anything that's that hasn't been released yet?
I'm trying to think. Vital does sound very cool. I will say that I've heard good things about that from you and some other people who have access to it.
Would you say Fab Filter?
Vital.
Oh, Vital. Yeah, Vital is going to be cool. Unfortunately,
Is that going to kill Serum?
Honestly, it might. From what I know and all that stuff, it definitely. Yeah, the thing that Serum is going to have for it is the notoriety, but as far as functionality and what you can do and the workflow and all that stuff, like that's all I can say about it. Yes, I do think that it's going to kill Serum, and I hope that not that I'm saying that
the right community around it, I think it can.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that I hope that it does by any means, and I don't hate Serum, but just the guy that has put so much work into this thing, I really want him to be successful, more importantly.
Right.
What?
And I think it's ultimately more about, building the right community around the thing, and the way you do that, and then, making the greatest synth ever. I mean, it's kind of back to my whole marketing argument, but you know what I mean? I mean, like, Faceplant could theoretically, kill Serum if, there was the community to do it. It's good enough. It's a refreshing enough way to work. If it was made a little bit more like, you know, I guess user friendly, it could probably kill Serum if it, if the right community got around it.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that's holding kilohearts back is that people are turned off by like being misinformed by excuse me, by their pricing options. And
Yeah, they are a little wacky, aren't they?
they're odd, but I think that they're fair. And
I think so too.
I think that like the workflow environment that and how integrated it is something that is really slept on as well. I mean, before I used Faceplant, I was a Serum guy too, and granted, I still make stuff in Serum. By like, I never use it personally, but I do it when people ask for like sound design tutorials or whatever. But the sheer amount of capability that you can do in Faceplant, or sheer amount of features and like streamlined workflow versus Serum, in my opinion, is like it's not really even a competition, to be honest. It really isn't. Um, you know, I think that like when people are like, "Oh, I'm missing my reverb filter," or it's got it has a built-in OTT, like those things are so trivial compared to like what Faceplant can do. And
Yeah, absolutely.
hopefully through all like the generator videos that I've shown and some of the stuff that some of the other guys are doing with Faceplant and stuff, like it'll catch on and it'll get up there. And I don't necessarily even need to have a competition between Faceplant and Serum. But as far as like pushing the sound design, um, as far as like just pushing that in that way, I do feel I would definitely allude to saying that Faceplant is so much better in that way. And that's a personal opinion. Feel free to disagree. It doesn't matter to me because I own both and I've paid for both, so whatever. But
Right.
that to each their own, yeah. Yeah, so I guess last question. Greedo said, what are some of the greatest misconceptions in music to you guys?
Okay, we should also make this fun. We should do one serious and one not serious one.
Okay. You first?
Oh, me first. I need to come up with a serious one.
I need to come up with a silly one,
Two kinds of people.
right? Hmm. So, yeah, all right, a serious one.
Okay. Oh, damn it! I came up with another one. It's just a joke one. It's still a joke.
That's okay. A joke one can be totally fine too. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be both. That's asking a lot from us after 2 hours of discussion to come up with topics. But yeah, I think like if you're not redlining, you're not headlining. That's one. Having to somebody said sub and mono. That's one as well that I think is pretty silly. I
Yeah,
think like
that was Crank. He was the one I competed with on the IDM competition. He's why this track exists.
oh awesome, yeah, cool. I almost kind of that would have been cool to hear his thoughts on some of the stuff that we talked about too, but maybe we can get to that at a later point in time. Yeah, I think that like having to have like third-party VSTs in order to make good music, I think is a pretty common misconception as well. I think that like it's really all about knowing your tools to make something happen, right? I mean, if you're missing something that literally cannot perform that specific algorithm of a feature or whatever, that's one thing. But 9 times out of 10, like your standard DAW or anything that you have can be more than sufficient for what your needs are.
Right. Well, I think that kind of goes back to sort of, I guess, well, maybe it's not a misunderstanding, but it's kind of a misconception because of the way that the technology of DAWs has evolved. And like, a DAW is seen as a tool instead of an instrument. And I think that, all of their greatest producers know how to play their DAW as an instrument. And I think if you can really dissect what that means for you, it's a very fruitful place to explore. Um, You know what I mean? It's like just trying to press every single button in your DAW and figuring out how to break shit and make your DAW crash.
Yeah, I love making things crash. That's one of the better. Sorry. Hold on. Hey. No. um. Yeah, I think that like thinking that there is a perception that music has to be a certain way. One thing that I brought up in a previous video is like I really try to warn people about getting into the trap of like, oh, this artist makes this kind of music in this DAW, so I'm gonna get this one too, you know, or that
Right.
plugin or that program. Like that's I ran into that when I first started, and I think that it was entirely unnecessary. But I do find that um, some people get so caught up in thinking that they're going to be like somebody else because of they use the same tools or something, you know.
Right. No, I mean, I think that that's kind of a typical beginner's pitfall, and it's something you have to get into to so that you can get your feet wet. Let's say get your feet wet and get over eventually.
Dog is gated with verb. Yeah, me too. All right, so let's let this be the last question because it's kind of simple.
Okay.
But
Well, I had my two misunderstanding ones. My sarcastic ones.
Sorry. What are those?
Putting your snare slightly off time doesn't mean that you're influenced by Jay Dilla. I think that's a very common misconception that needs to be removed.
That's a good one. Oh, yeah.
And that there is a better music producer than James Murphy, I think, is also something we need to get past. So we just need to accept that, you know, he perfected it, and there's never gonna be anyone better, and he's never been wrong, and that's it.
You heard the man.
I heard the man. You heard the man.
Move on. Accept it.
Move on. He did it best.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie. I don't even know who that is.
Jesus Christ. Well, two readings. He is a guy who owns a restaurant with a recording or a restaurant, a Michelin star restaurant next to a coffee shop that he also owns with a recording studio underneath that once walked into this restaurant at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday in a suit and a blazer, basically, just because that's kind of how he rolls. Saw the guy who was bringing me food crash the plate, didn't care, threw a newspaper on the table, and then went to go make music. And he could also be seen as the lead singer and, you know, creative force behind the band LCD Sound System.
Who's LCD Sound System?
I don't know LCD Sound System.
Man, I can tell you all about Audica and Inspected Records and that world, but anything else other than that,
yeah, no, that's fair. I have like a painfully encyclopedic knowledge of things. Like I remember like the names of artists and architects and buildings and stuff.
I think
better than
that's great.
a lot of people.
I'm so uncultured in like anything that's not electronic music. Like I think hip hop is as far as it goes for me.
Well, but that's the thing is it's the perfect what LCD Sound System is it's dance music. Ultimately, it's, you know, this perfect mixture of kind of like a Talking Heads influenced indie music with dance music.
Yeah, I have a shovel and I'm just continuing to dig the more that I say. So I guess the only thing left to do on that is to maybe just go look them up and then be like, oh yeah, that all made sense.
Yeah, go look up what's it called? Do you know the band Daft Punk?
No, never heard of them.
I'm
kidding. Okay, of course I have. Yeah.
No, I know, but really, I talked to this 17-year-old El Salvadorian for my podcast yesterday, and he thought the Daft Punk was from the 80s.
Oh.
Yeah, didn't really listen to their music, and I had to kind of stop him.
Kind of sounds like an 80s band, to be honest. And and there are some instances of some of their music that do sound somewhat 80s. All right, if Hive starts with LCD Sound System, we'll have 2 hours more of stream now. Okay, fair enough.
Well, it's the perfect music.
It's the perfect music. Well, then I'll definitely have to go take a look at it because that's saying quite a lot.
It absolutely is. Listen to "Dance Yourself Clean." It's their biggest song, but it's like that's the crest of it.
Dance yourself clean. Okay, I'll write it down. Yeah, right on. So the last question is, do you feel that dynamic music is on its way back and the loudness war might be ending? No,
God,
absolutely
I hope
not.
so. I don't think trends work that way in the age of the internet. All trends, um, in any on a technical level, kind of don't really come and go in the same way. It's just big personalities emerge more than anything. Um, like you're never going to hear like the Nirvana to the current version of like to the current overly technical thing that's happening. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. And
Um,
to kind of add to that, I feel like, if anything, I feel like the loudness war is going to shift in such a way that people are going to try to abuse what perceived loudness is as much as they can because of the normalization standard of stream, like whatever, right? Because now that they're like, oh,
right.
well, there's this like loud, fair loudness thing. There's still a lot of other ways that you can make a track sound louder through other means, and that would make sense why you asked that question, because dynamics is a way that you can do that. But at the same time, um, it will probably just mean that people will just start distorting and pushing their limiters even harder to just make a wall of sound, and it'll be who can make the thickest wall of sound.
Well, I'm right, and I think music's going to keep getting more timbral, and I think the microtonal movement is going to happen in a very big way in pop culture in a few years, and that's going to be pretty cool.
Yeah, that does seem like a really cool thing. I really love what the world is doing with sound design, of like it
Yeah,
is the polar opposite of getting more defined with microtonal, but at the same time contextualizing these experimental sounds in such a way, and that advancement is kind of also something I'm really interested in.
right. Um,
It could also, be, I mean, there's so much love to explore within this stuff, and I wouldn't be surprised too if we start developing ways to start hearing frequencies above what our normal frequency range is.
well,
And
you really like this idea of us being able to hear up to 30K somehow.
yeah, exactly. Or, like mice here at like 50K or something, right? So imagine what we could do with frequencies of that range and how that would change the whole dynamic of music, because we can only call music what we can hear, what we can feel. And correct me
Right.
if I'm wrong, but I don't think that like once you go past a certain frequency range, like let's just pretend like 500 hertz, you stop feeling things and you start relying on your ears. So, but imagine if our hearing was so articulate on that level, and how much more intricacy we can kind of like find within that.
All right. That was Duncan Trussell and Mr. Bill were talking about that music for ferrets, right?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh,
I probably should listen to more of his podcasts, but I find myself
oh no,
spending more
he
time in the
was
dark.
on. Yeah, he was on Duncan Trussell's podcast,
Yeah, I'm really
and they.
interested in the things that he has to say. I don't ever think about it, to be honest.
Well, I find it a lot easier to focus listening to a podcast and listening to music. And I think I'm just more fond of the format than I am of the format of music in
Yeah,
a lot of ways.
yeah, for sure.
Because music can be familiar and repetitive. Is familiar in a different way, I guess.
And
Like a
predictable, right?
podcast is, yeah, it's becomes predictable in a different kind of way because it's every time you listen to a song, it's the same thing.
Right.
But every time you listen to a podcast, you have the built-in familiarity of understanding who the host is, but also the uniqueness of the individual conversation taking place.
Yeah, and who, and who is talking, and the, like you said, the topics in place, and also the, I think that like that's a whole different conversation. But if you start incorporating things of like comedy, which is breaking expectations, how it was defined whenever I took theater class,
Right.
there is that level of spontaneity that keeps things fresh. Because a lot of times, I don't know about you, but whenever I have a playlist on, it's a playlist because it's songs that I like. So they're songs that I know that I'm going to want to listen to.
All right. It's hard to challenge your expectations in a way within a playlist.
Yeah.
because playlists are like all about feeding your expectations directly, like a IV.
Yeah, I totally agree with that because it's too like you, especially if you choose the playlist or like even if you have an artist that like is like, you know, let's say like Azalea Radio or something, right? All the songs are going to sound somewhat related to that vibe that you chose. So yeah, man, that's
Right.
super interesting, and I think that would definitely be something to revisit at some point later in time. But I think now is a good time to call it, and I just want to say thanks again for having, or sorry for being on here, and I hope that you had as much fun as I did, and I hope that the
Yeah,
viewers did
very
too.
cool.
Recording to logbook.
Hope they
Recording to
were. I
logbook.
wonder how many people actually managed to make it through the whole 2.5 hours of this. I know that for me, once it gets to an hour and a half, I struggle with losing viewers, but it seems like we've actually gained some, which is kind of cool.
You just never know with YouTube in particular. I found that YouTube is a lot more. It fluctuates a lot more than something like Twitch. Twitch is really hard to build a viewership just because you're competing with gamers, you're competing with other artists and all that stuff too. But and maybe it's just because I have a little bit more of a following on here, you know, with my subscriber base and all that. But
Right.
the community nonetheless is still really cool, and I think that a lot of people here wanted to see what you and I had to say today.
Yeah, that's cool.
Right on, man. Thank you so much for being here, and yeah, I guess let's keep in touch. And for all of you guys, you know, be sure to check out his Discord, which I will drop a link to in my own Discord here in a bit. And then this VOD will be public as soon as we close this out. But yeah, is there any last words that you want to say before we take off?
Wait, can you cut out the part where I mentioned that Skrillex put out a song?
Well, I can try, but
I don't think people need to know that he releases music.
Yeah, he's too popular. Let's go ahead and boycott by cutting that out. But yeah, no, for sure. Thank you, man. Thank you. I had a great time today, and you guys too. Thank you, chat, for helping keeping us engaged and asking questions and being involved. That's what this whole thing is about. But
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. I had a great time doing this.
cool. Thanks so much. So I'm gonna end the stream, and then you and I can have a couple last words if you like. Of just I just want to thank you in person again, and then all that stuff. But thank you
Yeah.
guys